The purpose of this morning's engagement is to meet with Garda Síochána to discuss a recent interim report on the review of youth referrals and issues arising therefrom. We are joined by the Commissioner, Mr Drew Harris, the Deputy Commissioner, Mr John Toomey, and Chief Superintendent Paul Cleary. And you're all very welcome. I will shortly invite the Commissioner to make his opening statement, but before I do, I must draw the attention of our witnesses to the situation in relation to privilege. Please note that you are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or it identifiable. And members, again, should be aware that under the salient rulings of the Chair, members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official by name in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I would now like to invite Commissioner Harris to make his opening statement.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Chair, committee members. Last month I provided a detailed briefing to the Policing Authority and public on the various problems we've discovered with the youth referral system. I don't wish to repeat myself or unnecessarily take up the committee's time, but I do think it is important that I place on the record of the Houses, the Oireachtas, and with this committee, the key points from that briefing. Again, at the outset, I'd want to repeat on behalf of Garda Síochána that I apologise to more than 3,000 individual, corporate and business victims that we have let down. They expected us to pursue the crimes committed against them to the fullest extent possible, and in their cases, we did not do this. Each and every one of these crimes should have been investigated. The public expects that if something is reported to Garda Síochána, that it will be investigated. I expect the same. We also let society down by not fully pursuing these crimes, some of them serious, committed by young people. I also want to apologise to those young people that we also let down. These were, in the main, the great majority, were vulnerable children who had committed crimes in the past and indeed would go on to commit further crimes. We should have done better by them at this time. Before I get into the detail of the problem, I think it is important to say that while our examination has found serious issues of how some crimes committed by young people were processed and dealt with by Garda Síochána, this should not take away from the significant and important work that has been done and is still being done by the Garda Youth Diversion Programme. It both prevents crimes, protects communities, and has steered thousands of young people and children away from crime and antisocial behaviour. Almost two-thirds of the children receiving an informal or formal caution as their first caution on the diversion scheme do not re-offend. And this has been a major benefit to the individuals themselves, their families and society at large. Rather than going through the rest of that statement, I would like now to refer to the slides and provide an explanation on the slides. In Garda Síochána, we had an examination team in place. It was headed by Paul, sitting to my left, and it examined the period July 2010, July 2017. And in that time, you can see that there was 100...
Commissioner, I'm sorry to interrupt you. When you reference slides, is this something that we can view on the... Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
No, I beg your pardon.
We could put on the screen now as well, if we could, on our screens.
Unfortunately, Chairman, some of us don't have the slides, so could you facilitate making them available to us?
Yes,
well, we all got them, but it would be better if they were on the thing, you know.
That's fair copy. We have an additional copy we can provide.
All right, okay. Well,
there you are, Senator.
Colm and
Thank
myself
you.
will share some.
Thank you.
You should have pointed it, shouldn't you?
Sorry for the interruption. We've just had, I know that you're waiting for one of these, a new computer system installed, and we've just had one as a new toy, and it worked very well last week, I have to say. So it would have been great if we had, here we are, it's just up. Can you see that?
No.
It's
Oh,
there.
yeah, here we are.
Business,
Yeah, very good.
We didn't get a censure to put it in.
here we are.
Okay,
The wonders of new technology.
Right, so I'm working off that first slide entitled "What the Garda Examination Team Found." So as you work down, you can see then that well, just over 100,000 of the referrals were deemed suitable then for the diversion programme, but then also then just over 55,000 referrals were deemed not suitable for the diversion programme. And it's within this group then that we've identified the issues. Of these 55,000, some 33,000 go on to a child being either charged or summoned. But then of the remainder, 22,000, there's no evidence of an associated charge or summons on pulse. When we examine that, there's explanation for the majority of those, but in some 7,894 cases, we're saying that these were not appropriately progressed. And this is 5% of the overall referrals, and you go right to the top figure, but we don't wish to diminish this, because this does relate, these 7,894 referrals does relate to 3,489 separate children. So this is a matter of some consequence, and although we were dealing with big figures, whenever we get it wrong, any percentage means that there are a large number of individuals engaged in this matter. I turn to the next slide then, impact on victims. 2,492 individual personal victims, 988 either organisational or business type victims. As it says, some of these victims may have received a letter stating that a person had been identified in respect of an offence that had been reported. And we also then categorise the majority of the 73% of these crimes which fall into 4 common crime categories of public order, theft, traffic or criminal damage. But there were serious crimes also alleged. 1 incident of rape, 1 incident of sexual offence, which was a sexual assault, 1 incident of child neglect, but also others including threats to kill, cultivation of cannabis, and violent disorder. So we would assess that the impact on the victims is profound. Even what we might regard as commonplace crimes can have a very heavy impact on individual victims. And in our approach to this, we've been very concerned in how we approach and deal with this matter with victims. Each victim, as appropriate, is receiving a letter specific to their case. Sorry, I've moved on to support for victims. The letter includes an apology, and we've also then provided contact details for the local Garda Victim Service Office and the Independent Crime Victims Helpline. And also then the victims are also given an option, if they receive a letter, of a personal visit by the local Garda team. We did have a helpline which was open for 2 weeks, and it received 35 calls and 16 emails. But the victims of what people are judging as serious crimes are receiving a personal visit, and this process is going on. So far, we've conducted 47 personal visits, and also then 4,567 letters have been sent out to victims. But we've also decided in a further 1,600 cases not to send a letter at the district level. That has been decided on the basis of the case, and that has been in respect of the difficulty in actually identifying a victim to engage with. We're also anxious not to re-victimise people. In some cases, we have ongoing engagement with these victims in various forums, and we're very careful that we actually don't re-traumatise or re-victimise any individual. And very much this is on a case-by-case, almost bespoke response as appropriate. May I then turn to the impact on young people? As I've said, 3,489 children were associated with referrals not appropriately progressed. The vast majority of these children had a history of reoffending, which meant that they had a lot of contact with An Garda Síochána before and after the incident that was not appropriately progressed. Each of these children, or if they are now adults, or their guardian or parent, as appropriate, will receive a letter setting out the impact of the issue on them, and that is ongoing. And again, I know that district officers have been speaking to parents and guardians in respect of these children as well. We move on then to slide entitled Significant Reduction in this issue by 2017. And as you can see from the bar chart and the line that runs through that bar chart, that 96% of these failures to act or not appropriately actioned happened between 2010 and 2015. What happens is Pulse Update 6.8 in November 2015 by and large addresses the feedback loop in respect of these referrals. That's backed up by a subsequent update of Pulse again 7.3, and that makes a very significant difference. So even really before we start our examination of this, system changes which we brought in on the back of examination by the inspector to our overall investigatory processes had addressed this problem in terms of the feedback loop and significantly reduced the issue. But we've continued to focus on this as you would expect. The next slide then sets out what those actions have been in terms of further action taken. It's talked about introduction of further Pulse editions, particularly 7.3 in February 2018, and the extra supervision that brings. The new monitoring system for all youth referrals was introduced in November 18. For the first time, a National Bureau for Child Diversion was established in December 18 with a Chief Superintendent in charge of this on a full-time basis. Staffing in the Bureau was increased throughout 18, and there is a staffing plan to be further implemented in 2019. Overall, in the organisation in 2018 was good in terms of the increase in the number of sergeants and inspectors that were available then for, in effect, frontline supervision. And last month then, new standard operating procedures were introduced together with e-learning on the youth referral process. And as of yesterday, 1,850 members had completed that process, and we intend to make sure over the next weeks that is fully rolled out. And also now, only this week, an Assistant Commissioner has been now appointed on a full-time basis to the Community Engagement Unit, which also includes the Youth Diversion Programme. And the Youth Diversion Programme will be subject to internal audit in the years ahead. And I would say again that the Youth Diversion Programme overall has worked well for many young people. It has brought major benefits to individuals and society. And what we have hoped to have done is enhance and strengthen the system to make sure that this cannot happen again. In terms of individual accountability then, over the course of seven years, 3,414 Garda members are associated with not appropriately progressing referrals. Of these now, 184 are no longer serving in the organisation. All referrals not progressed properly have been sent to their relevant divisional officer for them to consider in respect of the discipline regulations, and this is ongoing at this time. We will pay close attention to this, and we'll gather data and obviously keep yourselves and the Policing Authority updated. The general guidance on disciplinary processes and penalties have been provided to all divisional officers, but this is a process that they are responsible for. Is discipline in this matter is delegated to them, and it comes under their responsibility to determine on the individual considerations in respect of discipline. This is an interim report. In some ways, we've only got to the halfway mark in that we've been able to describe what the problem is. We've been able to describe what we can do to fix it, and that is now in place. We now know the scale of the task in terms of engaging with the victims, and that's ongoing, but also then understand the scale of the task in terms of addressing our own organisational and indeed individual accountability, and again, that is ongoing and not finished yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And, the slides were very, very helpful, I have to say, in the presentation. Now, I have a list of members who have indicated, and just that you know where you are, I've noted them in line with, as I've seen you indicate. The first is Deputy Jim O'Callaghan, followed by Deputy Donnacha O'Leary, Deputy Clare Daly, Deputy Mick Wallace, Senator Martin Conway, Deputy Jack Chambers and Deputy Colm Brophy. Deputy Martin Kenny to follow. Now, Deputy Jim O'Callaghan, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman, and thanks very much for coming in, Commissioner and Assistant Commissioner and Chief Superintendent. Am I correct in assuming that the problem, when you look at the statistics there in your slides, it appears to be a problem that has been virtually solved at this stage? When you look at 2016, there was 1.4% of referrals were not progressed appropriately. 2017, it's down to 0.7%. So has the problem been solved, and do you have indicative figures for 2018?
I think with the limits of human frailty, this problem has been solved. Of last year, in 2018, I would say a total of 17 cases out of some 16,000 weren't appropriately progressed, and those will be dealt with. But within this, we have both a systems failure that was repaired by Pulse, but we also have an issue of individual accountability. But there's always an element of individual accountability in terms of the actions of members and how they perform their duty.
So in terms of 2018, it sounds like it would be statistically irrelevant, the number of cases you have, which appear to have been not progressed appropriately.
Yes. That would be correct in terms of the statistics, but I would say that we are very conscious that every time we deal with someone, we're dealing with an individual, we're dealing with an individual case, yeah. and we don't want to let any individual down, and even those cases we are examining what went wrong and updating our system accordingly to make sure that those particular areas are repaired and this can't happen again.
And the 7,894 cases that weren't progressed appropriately, I know most of them took place between 2010 and 2015, but what was the reason for them not being progressed? Was it simply Garda failure on an individual basis, or was there a systems failure?
I think it's an element of both. I think a new system is introduced. I think there's an element of misunderstanding on the part of members of what they are expected to do when the matter is returned to them. And I think also then a new system is introduced with not sufficient briefing, training, etc. But at the same time, and saying all of that, and I'd apologise for the organisational failings in this. In 96% of cases, we do get this correct. Yeah. 96% of cases. So that would suggest that many of the members knew that when they received this, in effect, they had to prepare a file and submit that then for prosecution. So there is an element of individual accountability, whilst at the same time, and I would not wish to shirk what I would say is an organisational systems failing here as well. Okay.
Obviously, the objective is to try to deter children from continuing along a path of crime. Like, from your own assessment of the youth diversion programme, do you think it's succeeding in that objective?
Well, I think I'd refer back to the success that we've had in terms of those who come into the scheme and then now, in effect, have one interaction and never appear again. And the use of caution, be it informal or formal, has been successful and has directed many children away from destructive behaviour in terms of committing crime or antisocial behaviour, not only for them, for their society. And in effect, we know a lot of people come and look at our scheme and are envious of it and seek to emulate some of the successes that we've had down through the years. There's this patch, and we've apologised for it, we're not proud of it, and we've rectified the problems, but this scheme in itself is a good scheme, it works well.
And how can I ask you, do the victims of crime respond to the scheme if they're told that the person who perpetrated the crime upon you was a child and we're going to divert the child into the youth diversion programme. Do you get a mixed response from the victims of crime? Are some of them dissatisfied, particularly if it's a serious crime?
Well, I think, again, each of these are a bespoke case, and I think there's one of explanation to the victims about why we're proceeding in this way and trying to deal with this in a more in a fashion which prevents further offending, as opposed to just a punishment. That children can act unwisely and should be given a chance, in effect, to rectify their behaviour. And I think many people understand that and understand that individuals should be given a second chance. But this scheme also then deals with those who in effect have benefited from the scheme but still have carried on to reoffend.
And just finally, the people who make a complaint to An Garda Síochána, how can they keep apprised of how that complaint is being progressed by the Gardaí? Is it all dependent upon contacting the Guard to whom you reported it, or is there any objective way that you can just contact the Garda system and see how your complaint is being progressed?
Not clear about that, John.
Another way, if you make a complaint, say your bike is stolen, it could be a very serious crime. You're assaulted. You go and you make a statement, say in Kevin Street or something like that. How can you keep aware of whether somebody's going to be prosecuted? Is it dependent upon you contacting the Guard you dealt with to see what's happening?
There's a couple of ways in how we deal with that. If it's the more serious crime, there is a specific liaison officer appointed. Okay. So that liaison officer has direct contact on a regular basis with the victim of crime or the family, whatever is appropriate. In other cases, we have a victims service office, which is in every Garda division in the country. So it is opportune then for people then to can contact that office, and we will provide feedback on a specific case. Okay. In all other cases, the investigating Garda has a role and a responsibility then to keep the victim updated as to the progress of the crime. If there's a court case impending, there will obviously be ongoing liaison because those people will be attending court with us. Obviously, with the volume of cases, the level of interaction varies depending on the seriousness.
Yeah, okay. Listen, just going to conclude by saying that like the youth diversion programme, I think is a very good scheme. I think it should be promoted and encouraged, and I suppose the disturbing thing about this was that parts of it seemed to be there was a question mark over it. But I'm sure it's the wish of this committee that the scheme really continues, because if you can get a child off the path of criminality at an early stage, well then we're saving society and that child and victims of crime in the long term. And if you don't, well then you've got a problem until the boy generally is in his 40s. But thanks for coming in anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy O'Caoláin. And now Deputy Donegal Leary, please.
I suppose I'd like to take the opportunity. Some of these issues, I suppose, I can be critical of the Gardaí, but I always like to take the opportunity to commend the good work that the Gardaí do too. And I think, I suppose, commendation is due to the Gardaí for significant seizures in recent days, and I want to just acknowledge that at the outset. I also want to say, and the record of all can be checked on numerous occasions, I'm a big advocate of the Youth Diversion Project. I think it does excellent work, and I would like to see it expanded. I would like to see more projects right across the country. But there was a clearly an issue here, and I suppose it's important to be very clear that this relates not to young people who refer to the Garda Youth Diversion Project, albeit I'm sure that there are issues with that. I'm sure there's other deputies who might raise issues in relation to that in a while. But this relates to those deemed not suitable for the Garda Youth Diversion Project, and only those. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct, and that's the figure of 55,000, yes.
Okay, very well. Look, I think it was a major statement. Bob Collins at the Policing Authority meeting, I saw it reported, said that in 3 years of the Policing Authority being functional, this was the most serious issue that had arisen in his view. And I think that is a significant statement, and I think it is very likely appropriate and correct. I think it is a very serious issue. I think it is unacceptable that almost 8,000 reported crimes committed by 3,500 children and young people were not properly dealt with. Now, I recognise that 75% of these cases fell into the categories of public order, theft, traffic and criminal damage. Not that these are insignificant crimes, but I want to focus on the very serious crimes just for a second. there's 55 or so that have been categorised as extremely, as very serious crimes. Specifically, 3 of those has been identified as rape, sexual assault and child neglect, extremely serious offences. I would speculate, I imagine you would tell us if there was a murder or manslaughter, so I'm assuming that the remainder are particularly violent assaults and things like that. Perhaps you can clarify that. Now, my understanding of the process is this isn't either an issue with cases that were not even referred to the Garda Youth Diversion Project. So if an offence happened and it was not referred to the Garda Youth Diversion Project, it wouldn't have ended up in this category here. It is only those that were referred and then deemed not suitable. Now, my understanding, and I've put this on the record a few times and it hasn't been contradicted, so this is an opportunity to contradict it if it's the case, but my understanding is that to be referred to the Garda Youth Diversion Project, you must agree to be cautioned and take responsibility for the offending behaviour. Is that correct?
No, the referral would have been for any child who was a suspect in an offence. So that creates the 158,000 youth referrals. The 103,000 then that are referred to, those are the individuals who accept that there's a prima facie case and they accept their part in that and have made an admission and full admission as to their part. So that's that 103,000. The 55,000 then are those then who maybe have denied their part in this or have had previous had been previously dealt with through the youth referral scheme. So, but you are correct in that when we talk about 158,000 youth referrals, that does refer to 57,000 individual children who have been identified as being suspects and connected to an offence.
And in relation to those serious offences, are you aware whether in those, say those 3, for example, that were given, did the young person involved take responsibility for the offending behaviour? I know it's not a legal definition of accepting guilt, but did the young people involved accept responsibility for their offending behaviour?
I don't know that detail, and I may have to get back to you because that's a very specific question about, in effect, 55 individuals and how they responded in an interview. So I don't know that. You asked me an earlier point then, in respect of more serious offences and the very serious sexual assaults, threats to kill. It sits as well, and there was 3 of those. And in terms of affray or violent disorder, there's 7 incidents of that. So there are other serious incidents in this. Paul, do you know?
In relation to
those you admit or don't admit?
the individual details, I wouldn't have those definite details to hand. What I would say is that the 55 may not have been refused access to the diversion programme just because they didn't admit. It could have been previous offending or a number of other things that dictated whether they were accepted or not. But as regards the individual detail of the 55 children, we don't have that to hand today.
Okay, and I tell you why I think it's important that that be known. Because if it was the case, and it may not be the case, but if it was the case that they accepted responsibility for that individual behaviour, that raises the possibility that a victim came forward to the Gardaí complaining of a sexual assault or a rape or a violent assault, and that the young person in question accepted that they had responsibility for that, and yet nothing was done in these 55 cases. Now, I think if that's the case, and you may not be able to tell me now if that's the case, but if that's the case, I think that's an absolutely appalling vista and would be incredibly upsetting to the victim. And I think in any case, whether that is the case or not, I suppose what I would question is, like with those cases that we have rightly seen a fair bit of discussion around the disciplinary procedures and the efforts to get things right. But in those cases, like, I mean, is there anything being done now to pursue those cases, those very serious offences, people who are guilty of sexual offences in 2 instances at least, and other serious offences? Is there anything now being done to ensure that they face responsibility for their actions, or is there anything that can be done?
Well, we still we remain in discussions with the Director of Public Prosecutions in respect of a number of these matters. So that hasn't closed down, and I'm limited in what I can say in respect to the individual cases that we've brought before the Director. And obviously, if we can resurrect a prosecution, then we'll seek to do so, but under the direction of the Director of Public Prosecutions, obviously. Yes, within this, there are very serious matters, and that's why, you know, we have embarked on an examination of the conduct of each member in respect of these, and not just the member, but also then, does that also lead into the supervision of the member as well? Because within this, and I have to be careful what I say, because I can't actually, in law and in the regulations, I have given the divisional officers responsibility for discipline, and I cannot be in a position to direct them, or even by inference direct them. But I do acknowledge that some of this is very serious, does look bleak, and we have to deal with that appropriately. And if that means then that these matters have to be dealt with through the discipline code, then so be it.
Very well. And I suppose I think it is right, and I'm glad to hear you indicate that you will work with the DPP to resurrect cases and to continue to pursue cases, because I think that is important, particularly in relation to those 55 very serious offences. I think, you know, there has to be, I think the programme and the principles behind it I understand, but there has to be accountability and justice in those cases. One of the other questions I want to ask is, there has been some speculation in the media in relation to the fact that there may be cases involving adult offenders where cases were not pursued or prosecuted correctly as well. Now, that's not based on official statements, but some of these sources I would expect to be fairly well placed. So can you shed any light on that, whether you're anticipating that you or the policing authority will be making any statements in the coming time, or any other body, about cases relating to adults that were not progressed through the criminal justice system correctly?
So that issue raised in the public section of the policing authority. What I would point to is the pulse system 6.8 and 7.3, and the pulse changes that were done in response to an inspectorate report into investigation in 2014. So in making the changes that they recommended and the updates that they recommended, it also had the impact of improving our performance around the juvenile referrals. So as of this moment, through Pulse, but now also then in this year and next, the introduction of an investigation management system, we have a far more thorough and complete understanding of the investigations that are coming into the organisation, both proactive and reactive, and how they'd be advanced, whether adult or juvenile. We've asked our own professional standards unit to look at this. We'll report to the authority, but obviously then the authority are also at liberty to ask the inspector to revisit this area again. But as of this moment, we are putting faith in the Pulse system and the Pulse updates that we have, both for juvenile and adult offenders, and how they're being dealt with by Garda Síochána.
Okay, I understand that as you're not anticipating any significant statement either from yourself in relation to a category of adult offences?
No.
Not properly correct?
No.
I am understanding you correctly, though.
Yes, we have nothing to indicate that this scale of problem exists in respect of adults.
All right. Chair, I think he indicated to the Commissioner that they would be willing to take questions on alternative topics as well, briefly.
Well, whatever the Commissioner feels that he's in position to respond to, and if you want to raise an issue that he's not, maybe a response could issue subsequently. I think we indicated in the initial notification there might be other issues.
Yes.
And that was just to accommodate members.
I will ask them together briefly and answer them together briefly.
Just on that, you know, it might be better if you can keep it short Otherwise, I would like to keep the train of address.
Yes.
But if you can truncate it.
I will, yes,
fine.
and I will ask them together,
Okay.
and the Commissioner
All right.
will ask them together. At the last meeting, you indicated that you would be willing to meet the Justice for the Forgotten and I believe Stephen Travers. I want to ask you if that has since happened. I want to ask you, you sought a report on the policing of the protests at North Frederick Street, and I want to ask you if you've received that and what actions you intend to take on foot of that. And finally, I have to say I was very surprised at the decision you took to reduce, as that's my understanding of it anyway, the number of Gardaí who would be trained this year, Templemore, by 200, in the context where chief supers and sergeants are absolutely crying out for resources, and I'm sure you have it on a daily and weekly basis from them. You know, grassroots policing is still struggling to recover from the costs that exist. So I have to say I was surprised, and it's a decision I don't agree with at all. So I want to put that to you as well. Thank you very much, Chair.
All right, Deputy O'Leary. Please, Commissioner, if you can.
Yes, I did meet with Justice for the Forgotten. We had a good meeting. I think they told me I was the first Commissioner that met in quite some considerable time, and there were actions flowing from that, and we will deliver on those over the next months as well. We've also met with other victims and had exchanges with them. So that has been just part of my, I think, just almost monthly duties in terms of meeting various families, not just from the Troubles, but from other tragic circumstances, and assuring them of our ongoing interest and care for them as well. North Frederick Street did receive a report in respect of that. We are building in the lessons learned in respect of how we deal with these situations where we have individuals, private individuals, who seek to repossess property after civil proceedings, and there's been a change in how we manage those operations, in short, probably we're far more assertive in terms of how they're done, at what time they're done, and to make sure they're done to minimise the risk of breach of the peace. And that would be. Well, this has been built into our standard operating procedures. They're under examination at the moment by the Inspectorate, and the Inspectorate's report shortly to the Policing Authority, and I think through that vehicle that then would become public that way. In respect of so in 2018 we recruited 800 guards. This year our recruitment figure is 600. What I would say is that I've also a very ambitious programme for recruiting Garda staff this year, an additional 600, and part of their role is to displace sworn members from roles out to the front line. So there is a growth in the organisation this year, quite considerable. It's many hundreds, between both the recruitment of Garda staff and Gardaí. We're bringing in an additional 1,100 individuals. Obviously, there's always cessations, so our net rise as an organisation will be somewhere in the order of 800, and all of that is directed towards enhancing the front line. You know, we're not employing Garda staff to have more clerical assistance. What we are wanting to do is recruit Garda staff to displace sworn members to other frontline duties, whether it's beat and patrol type duties or whether it's towards the investigation of serious crime.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Deputy O'Leary. Deputy Clare Daly, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for coming in. And if I could apologise, I'm going to have to pop out at a certain stage, but I will be back. And if there is time at the end, Chair, if I don't get all the questions in now, I might do another round when I come back if we've time. Yep. I suppose the first thing to say is there is something horribly familiar about us being here, looking at another Garda report and admission of apologies or, figures not being right and all the rest of it. I think in terms of this one, it's important to say that this was happening on the watch of your predecessors, Noreen O'Sullivan, Dunlo, Coulon, but at a time when scrutiny and information and accountability was actually centre stage. And that's a bit scary. And in that context, I suppose what screams out about me is the tiny print at the bottom here and the last remark, interim report, all figures provisional. And I'm reminded obviously of the 1 million breath tests that became 2 million. I'm reminded of John coming in and telling us there were some minor issues about the classification of homicides, and then they turned out to be not minor at all. So this is an interim report, yet he first identified the issue in 2014, did a scoping exercise in 2017. Would that not be time enough to have a final report? And what assurance can you give us that interim doesn't mean a 50 or 100% increase, as we saw in the other interim reports that we got previously?
So the assurance, very directly, I can give to you is, one, the rigour with which this has been advanced and addressed, and definitions and the individual examination of each of these cases, which we subsequently then have got validated then by Crow Ireland, and they've done initial validation and are doing a subsequent validation. The reason this is interim is that an important part of this is getting feedback from the 3,400 odd members then that we are going to approach to say, well, what exactly happened in these cases? We don't expect what the Garda examination team found. I think those numbers are pretty solid. They may change by 1 or 2, but I can assure you that there's not, a 5% or 10% variation in those. In no way is it going to be a 50%, 100% variation. That has been the subject of very close examination, and we were very particular since my arrival, but even well before that, in the means in which Paul and his team and the means in which AC Lee led this to ensure the validity and certainty of the figures that we were dealing with. So I have confidence in those figures. If I didn't, I wouldn't have issued the interim report. Why this is interim is, as I've explained, we have to have the consideration of the discipline issues and that explanation coming back. And I think that will further inform us on what happened here and the reasons for it.
You said if you weren't confident, you wouldn't have released the interim report. And do you think your predecessors were wrong to issue interim reports then in their case?
Well, if I speak for myself, buck stops with me with this, and I wanted to be sure of these figures, but the team also, for their own professional outlook on this, also wanted to be sure of these figures. And the organisation has been through the sad position of having to change figures and the damage that did in terms of confidence. And everybody was determined that we'd avoid that situation. I'm entirely confident with these figures, and the buck stops with me with these figures.
And when can we expect the final report then? When do you...
There's a couple of elements to that depending on the discipline processes. Now, some of the discipline processes I envisage may stretch on for many months, but I think a lot of it could be dealt with quite quickly, and I would hope within the next 3 to 6 months that we were getting sufficient feedback that we'd be able to inform yourselves and the police authority of the progress that we had made, and indeed the lessons that we had learned. What is the feedback from the district and divisional officers in terms of what they're being told? Because one of the things that we have found is a substantial number of cases where juveniles weren't proceeded with, their adult co-accused were proceeded with. So there was an intervention in respect of the of a crime, but it happened in the adult courts, and and nothing happened to the juvenile. So there are other facts which are yet to emerge in the examination of this.
And in that context, in the meeting with the policing authority, did the policing authority have a copy of the report in advance of the meeting?
They had a copy of the letter that I also sent to yourselves. So they had that letter of, I think, 16th of January, which I also forwarded to this committee as well.
And I thought that was very prompt of you, and actually it was a nice change that we got it so promptly when it was with the policing authority. But if that's the interim report, then I do have a problem, because that's a couple of pages of a letter. Okay. And if that's what the policing authority were given to scrutinise in advance of their meeting with yourselves. Why didn't they get the full report? Like, they're supposed to be the ones.
There is a further report being finished off, which is in effect breaks down these figures further, and that's been prepared for the Policing Authority. And when that's prepared, obviously this committee will also receive a copy at that time.
But how big is the interim report?
Well, we've received an initial draft, but that draft I'm not content with. I think it contains information which would conflict with entering into, in effect, a consideration of discipline there. So there's information in it which could potentially then upset or corrupt a consideration of discipline. It goes into great detail and into, in effect, almost down to individuals as well, and even that's not so even in terms of the Gardaí, that's true, but also in respect of some of the information within it. Certainly, victims may be able to identify themselves as well. So it needs to be in effect lifted up a level. I've received a report which has nearly too much detail, and it's not it would be detail would be incorrect to in effect put into public domain.
I have a real problem with that answer, in that, like you've just said, a draft interim report, but we thought we were looking at was an interim report. The policing authority thought they were scrutinising, well maybe they didn't, I don't know, an interim report, but in actual fact what you've confirmed is they got a 4-page letter, the same as we did, with some figures on it. I asked you, was that substantially different? How big was the interim report? And you said the interim report was in draft format and you weren't happy with it. So, I mean, is there not a contradiction there that you're bringing a letter really to the policing authority for them to ask a few questions, but the actual full interim report is being kept from them? And given that you said you were very confident and you were kind of holding back on the publication of the figures, you wanted to be absolutely sure of the figures. Should you not have waited for the interim report and given the interim report to the policing authority? Because now we know they didn't actually get it, like.
Well, what I've provided in the letter and in the briefing is a comprehensive breakdown of the figures. You can take it down. There are more that we can break down in terms of individual tables, and we have done that in the draft interim report that's been received to me. But within that report is detail which is I cannot put in the public domain, both in terms of the identification of victims but also the impact it would have on any potential consideration of discipline. Now, what we've done previously is perhaps we haven't considered the discipline and we were able to put more detail out into the public domain. That is not the position in this case. I have to have due regard to a discipline process which is very heavy on process, and I can't create, in effect, a process weakness because I put information out into the public domain.
And that sounds logical.
Well, that's that is the rationale. We will share to the maximum what we can with the policing authority and then with yourselves. And more detail can be given as we go through the discipline process. Why I say we're at the halfway mark is we have engaged, and this is probably an extraordinary step. I can't think of a parallel to it where we've said that we're going to examine the actions of 3,400 members with a consideration of discipline. We do need the space to do that so that we're compliant with our process.
And that is rational, but it still doesn't get away from the fact that the public body charged with oversight of An Garda Síochána were not in possession of an interim report. They got a 4-page letter to scrutinise, and the analysis and the background to it is presently in draft form, even though you commenced the process in 2014, looking back at, or was flagged in 2014, looked at the process in 2017. But look, on the question of, I just, you said we'll give the police and authority what we can. That, to be honest, is a problem for me because,
Well, but neither can I put into the public domain, in effect, personal information about individuals or information which, in terms of the process, the discipline process, could derail it. And I can't do that either. You know, I must be responsible about the information that I have within, that I hold and how I use it. Now, we will, as this goes on, we can provide more information. Certainly, there's more in terms of the information that we can release now that we will do, and we will do that to the Policing Authority. And as I said, you will receive it at the same time. But I also have to say, we issued those letters on the 16th of January. I really would say that these figures went firm no earlier than 7 days before that. So really, when we got to a position where we were sure of our figures, we immediately then shared those with the Policing Authority. So, you know, I could have waited. You know, some weeks until I'd got this report, but we took the step of, when we knew, we then took the step of almost really in effect immediately sharing it, but certainly sharing it forthwith with our accountability bodies, including yourselves.
At the same time, I mean, in other contexts, a drip feed sort of isn't helpful. I mean, if you spend so much time on getting the figures right, well then, I would have thought that the written report to back it up would also have been signed off, because you told us that you need to complete the disciplinary process to give the final report, but you haven't got the interim report because that's in draft form now. But a lot of this seems to hinge on the disciplinary process. How much of that disciplinary action has been initiated so far? And you know, what ranks are we talking about? You talk about divisional officers. Can you explain the rank of the divisional officers, and is the implication of that nobody of a higher rank than a divisional officer will be called to account for this situation, or what's the process for dealing with the divisional officers who may have had a role in this?
Divisional officer is a chief superintendent. So under the present regulations, they in effect examine these issues, examine on a case-by-case basis the actions of the individual members, and assess those then in terms of consideration. Respect, is there a discipline case to answer, and if so, then of what severity? Now, in the examination of those, that may then open up that other individuals of whatever rank may have a case to answer, and certainly we're not excluding that should happen. That certainly must happen in terms of making sure that this is a fair and open process. We're looking at 3,400 members, and some have retired, so it's a little less than that, but we're looking at a large amount of members, and this is underway, but it will take some time. I imagine that the more minor issues can be dealt with quickly, but the more substantial issues can take months to actually resolve in our present process.
How many people have been sanctioned already, and of what rank would they be?
I haven't that data to hand, but I can provide that data and indeed provide it in a periodic fashion. The next public meeting with the Policing Authority is on the 24th of February, and we want to have an update then, so I can provide the same update to the committee.
Well, that would be great. And would it be by rank? Would you have? Is it broken down by rank, or are we assuming this is all at Garda level, like?
Well, the initial investigations are against an individual Garda member. Some of them in the interim will have been promoted, but also then some of them, or some cases, may involve issues in respect of the duties of a supervisor. But we have to see how that opens up in terms of these cases. It's too early. It's too early to say what the numbers are.
And in terms of, say, the more senior officers, say if there was a number, a higher number in a particular region, and that might have been a miseducation of the people under a divisional officer or something, who's overseeing the entire process, and what if there is a role for at divisional officer level, who's taking responsibility for that?
So in respect of if a superintendent or a chief superintendent has a case to answer, is that what you mean?
Yeah. Who's?
Well, when we get a response in terms of what has happened in the division, then it'll have to be assessed. You know, was that such a breakdown in supervision as opposed to process, that it also requires consideration of discipline.
So where will that go?
That would happen in the centre with the AC responsible for discipline matters. Yeah.
On that, and you'd expect all of that to be done within the next 6 months, or?
Well, I'd say those matters will be more protracted. I would suggest that a lot of the discipline, because there's a lot of this that just relates to one instance, and I'd expect then that divisional officers will have a consideration of what the appropriate response is, and I would think that a lot of it can be dealt with quite quickly. I don't want to sort of like preempt their decision making, but once we get into more complex matters, then that will take months to resolve. But we will have a better picture of this in the next 3, but certainly 6 months.
And we'll get some of that as it comes up.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Well,
that'd be helpful.
well, I have an ongoing obligation to keep the authority up to date on this, and so yourselves as well.
Just on the question Donna had asked, and obviously the policing authority have identified that some of the problems with the youth diversion programme could have been replicated in the adult system, as it were, and I know obviously it's unique in some ways, but I wasn't clear on what you said. You were kind of seemed to be saying, look, this has been raised, but we think Pulse has sorted it, or did you say GPSU are examining that area? I just wasn't clear on.
Well, so the evidence from this and the evidence from the introduction of 6.8 and 7.3 is that those systems improvements will have in effect improved our performance. But we want to be sure. The question has been raised in public, okay, and I'm certain will be followed through. So we want to be sure. But there's nothing which indicates to us at this moment in time that we have a problem like this ongoing. 6.8, 7.3, but also then we have a further surety in terms of the investigation management system is also being introduced, and that will provide further supervision of the investigations that are ongoing in the organisation, right across the whole organisation, and how they're being supervised and progressed.
Are the GPSU looking at?
Yes, they are. The GPSU are looking at this area, okay, because, as I say, it's been raised in public, and we want to be able to give a public account of what that position is. And if we find something, then we'll have to obviously report that as well. Okay,
thanks. Could I ask a few other little outside issues, or will I wait till I come back for them?
If you wish to wait till you come back.
Yeah, if that's
again,
it.
If you're happy to do that.
I don't mind, yeah.
Unless you want to take the same option that Deputy O'Leary took, just to truncate them, because I don't want to lose.
You won't hold it
thread.
against me when I come back, though, will you?
I won't hold it against you at all, no.
Right, okay.
Here or outside.
Well, I was going to raise some points around ICT and that kind of stuff, yes, because obviously Pulse is kind of, some of your changes on Pulse have been given us an assurance as to why we, should have confidence now. And obviously, the last time you were here in response to Deputy O'Callahan, you did say IT was the biggest problem, sort of, that the organisation faces. Yeah. And kind of in that context, I mean, and particularly in the context of the amount of money's been spent on the maintenance of Pulse, and it's a piece of it. Where are you at, like, with a replacement system, or have you gone there, or what is the story there with that?
Well, Pulse, and we're now at edition 7.3, but in effect, it's almost like talking about a car which has moved from Mark 1 to Mark 4. It has been rewritten and recoded. And we've a team, a very dedicated team within An Garda Síochána, which are always bringing it up to date. And the latest work on it has been so that it's fit for the Schengen processes. And that has been a huge rewrite again of the Pulse system. So, but what we are also doing then is adding additional ICT systems which will assist the members. So we've talked about the investigation management system, but also then our system to manage rostering, the RDMS system as well, but also then also other record systems. We do have a big investment programme in ICT. It's part of the Commission of Future Policing, and with that then also comes the training issues as well. And I would also then point to our mobility project, which allows members on the ground to access records remotely through some sort of handheld device, and that's a very significant uplift as well. But there's other areas then that we want to address as well, and we will do so over time. We're running out computer-aided dispatch right across the whole country, and we'll want to seek to update that in the near future, because that gives you a far better handle on what your demand is and how you're spending your time. So the present system wouldn't allow us to do that, but even beyond that then a custody management system as well. So we keep on progressing, but there's more to do.
I put it slightly differently. I see, and even in some of the examples you've given, a massive black hole here that will never be filled. It's almost like a self-creating maintenance lucrative project for certain private outfitters out there. I mean, you mentioned the roster and duty management system, but you told the policing authority that that was an off-the-shelf system. In other words, Accenture weren't building it, they were just copying something they have already there, and yet we know that they were given €100,000 in 2017 and 200,000 for that, for a package off the shelf that they didn't have to do any work. How much are they going to be paid in total for that by the time it's finished? And I mean, well, I'll have another one. Well, you know, in the same sort of vein, if you look at, like, say, the amounts that were paid to Vantage Resources, 200,000 and 300,000 a month for pulse maintenance. Like, it's like you create this big unwieldy system, and then the fellas who create the mess get paid hundreds of thousands per month to maintain it, and yet everybody knows it's a nightmare that has contributed to a lot of these problems with data management or whatever. So
whenever we buy any system which is in effect off the shelf, you always have to adapt it to the peculiarities of the operating environment, and our rostering system, but also then the allowance and the enhanced payments for Saturday and Sunday type working, for instance, that has to be built into that. So there's peculiarities of this jurisdiction that have to be built into any system. So inevitably you're buying systems predominantly maybe from America or Canada, and you have to adapt them to our operating environment here. And I think that's the same for any law enforcement agency in any jurisdiction. But you've asked me very specific questions about costs and projected costs, and I would ask if I was allowed to come back to the committee to give an explanation of those, because I don't have that detail.
No, that would be great. I mean, I think particularly like the idea of paying Vantage Resources between 200 and 300,000 a month for pulse maintenance. My God, maintenance of a, anyway. Just on the last thing, and I will very briefly, just on civilianisation and that as well. I believe, and I know you're going to tell me that it's at last you've fulfilled what the Garda Inspectorate have asked for in moving the Garda Technical Bureau and moving them to the forensic place upstairs.
FSI, Forensic Science.
Forensic Science, Ireland. But I believe that, obviously this was long flagged, but has it not outlived its flagging? Have we not gone to the point where other systems that move to this type of arrangement are actually looking at bringing this back into Garda control or into police control? I mean, one of the problems here is that, and again it comes back to, I suppose, respect and dignity and a code of ethics as well. I'm led to believe that the staff involved in this, some of whom have 20, 30 years service, are being given their new terms and conditions this week and told to sign up by the 22nd of February. You're moving from An Garda Síochána into the civilian end of things, which certainly doesn't sound like respect and dignity, and potentially raises questions about the chain of evidence, about highly skilled staff being lost, levels of training that they would have had not been replicated under the new system, and that being sold and justified under the guise of civilianisation, which we would like, but we actually might end up with something more expensive and a loss of a huge expertise, not to mind treating staff very poorly in the interim.
Commissioner, just a last response, Deputy Daly, because I have to move it along, please.
Well, there's quite a bit I could say about that, but I think actually I should address that in a written response, because there's been a lot of negotiation, but also then this is around the arrangement with FSI about how they provide scientific support to investigation. And I would say, actually, to the counter, that the movement across Europe is actually that scene investigation and then forensic examination of what is retrieved from scenes, and then the giving of evidence should be the preserve of those of scientists and those who can give independent forensic evidence independent of the investigation. And that's the general direction. And this is probably a stepping stone along the way. So not that it's going to be coming back to us, but actually then the general direction across other regimes in Europe is the opposite to that.
Are you confirming that scene investigation is going to be handed over as well?
Well, no, I'm not. No, but I'm saying the contrary to what you're suggesting is that it's not drifting back into law enforcement. The opposite is happening. And so
no,
we'll have to look carefully at what we're
correct you on that, because what's been said is forensic examination will be done by the scientists, but scene investigation will continue to be done by Gardaí. The problem is, it's not the Gardaí who have the expertise in serious crimes. It's maybe the local Garda who might go out to do a burglary or something will have to do the scene investigation. That'll be then handed over, whereas presently you have, within your remit, trained for many, many years, highly expert staff who have that unbroken chain, and I'd be seriously concerned about that, because the example you gave me about Europe, you're not replicating here. So I don't know why you mentioned it.
Well, I think if I submit a written report on this, please, because it is a live issue.
You'll take on board the points made and respond to the committee.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Deputy Daly. Deputy Mick Wallace to be followed by Senator Martin Conway, please.
Thanks, Caoimhghín, and thanks very much for coming in. Just with regard to the report first, to touch on an angle, I suppose, that hasn't been touched on. I mean, we're very aware of the fact that juvenile liaison officers are doing some very good work around the country in steering young people away from crime. But this controversy has probably thrown a bit of light on all the young people that actually are falling through the cracks, and the ones that are deemed unsuitable for the programme and thus left out of it. And there seems to be a lot of these people, it seems a huge number. Was it 55,500 were deemed unsuitable for diversion programme, and obviously your 7,894 came out of that. I mean, I think there's a wide acceptance that, well, I would think anyway, that I'm just wondering what you think. These people probably need our help most, and I'm not saying that it's easy to make that happen. But I was only in the last few days, I was talking to a guy involved in the intervention and prevention programme out in Ballyogan, where I believe they're doing some great work with young people, and very troubled young people at times. Yeah. But when, the expression he used was that when they're prepared to actually get down and dirty and work with the kids and listen to them and bring them under their wing and see what the kids are interested in and steer them away from a life of crime, many of them coming from troubled backgrounds, the whole lot. Would you see a potential for actually An Garda Síochána working with a large cohort of these 55,000 or the likes of them that are not actually deemed suitable at the moment?
Well, this is over a 7-year period, so the 55,000 is a big number, but you can divide that down into the various years. In effect, the 103,000 are the ones that we've worked with and we've tried to divert. The 55,000 have been either into the programme, or the offence in a smaller number of cases was so serious that they were deemed not suitable for the referral programme. And therefore then it's our job then to report this matter for prosecution. Now we do engage with a lot of youth programmes. through community policing and through the various services that we provide. But there's a lot of that heavy interaction in terms of the time and resources that are required, which probably sits better with other agencies other than in Garda Síochána. Certainly we can have an input and we can direct individuals towards that who are engaged in behaviour which is self-destructive in terms of recidivism, and we do a lot of that through the JARC programme, but that intervention just can't be about on Garda Síochána. We have to fulfil a role with others, both other state agencies, but also then other players in terms of supporting them, supporting young people. But the intervention that you talk about is very resource intensive and not entirely wouldn't be entirely delivered by An Garda Síochána. Certainly we would support it and seek to support it, but it couldn't be ours alone.
So do you think that you don't have the resources to get even more involved in this area? Because it was put to me that, given that it's something that works really well when the Gardaí actually get involved at ground level, at grassroots level with these young kids, that it makes progress and it does save many of them from falling through the cracks.
Well, we do have a focus on crime prevention. We certainly do have a focus on working with children and young people who are troubled, and that is undoubtedly one of the things we are achieving with. I'm glad to hear that when An Garda Síochána engage in these matters, it does seem to work well. But I don't think that is, that is our primary function. I don't think that's a function that we should be leading on it. I'm not sure it is an issue of resources. I think there are other agencies better placed to be leading on this in terms of providing overall youth services, not just in terms of alternatives to being on the street, but actually, so that there's some progression in terms of careers or jobs that young people might pursue or qualifications that they might pursue. That's just not solely a job for An Garda Síochána. And I know that there's a government initiative to look at youth justice and alternatives within youth justice, and certainly we're playing our part with others in that, and perhaps developments can come from that. But I know we do a lot at the moment, but I don't believe it's our primary responsibility.
Okay, just to touch back on a point that Clare raised about the fact that the policing authority didn't get the full report, as the full interim report, and you mentioned the fact that due to issues in relation to victims and the disciplinary process that's ongoing, that you weren't really in a position to put this into the public domain. There's a very strong tendency in here for reports to be written and then for all the reports not to be provided or published. You said that you couldn't really put it into the public domain for the reasons mentioned, but is there a facility for actually giving it to the likes of the policing authority with the proviso that it doesn't go into the public domain, or is that a non-runner because of the way it operates?
Any document that I provide to the policing authority is in effect a finished document. It's not a draft, and as such the policing authority then is subject to the freedom of information. So I have difficulty then in providing to them information then which could potentially then directly impact upon a victim. And secondly then, the discipline process is a bit different. I can't talk about potential discipline processes at this moment in time. Whenever we get through this, I can talk about them in retrospect, because decisions will have been made and actions will be taken. But the document I have at the moment, in that we are in the very early days of this, and because in some ways the initial work, and there's been a lot of work given to the divisional officers in dealing not only just with the members, but more importantly dealing with the victims. The initial concentration has been on the victims, because they're dealing with potentially, some of them, many hundreds of victims, that they concentrate on that. So in retrospect, I can talk about the discipline. I can't talk about the discipline in this stage, but there is information, and I'd always be very careful about putting information which inadvertently identifies either victims or potential perpetrators.
Just to touch on a couple of other points.
Can you put them
Kind of. I asked the Minister for Justice last week, but didn't get much of an answer from him about the protected disclosures. And I'm wondering, are you confident that the process is fit for purpose in its present form?
The protected disclosures that have come across my desk in terms of the matters that I've been dealing with have been subject to process, and I'm content with the process that we've put in place. Yes.
So you think the protected disclosures apparatus is working well?
Well, yes, in that it provides a route for issues to be raised, and in particular those who wish to raise whistleblowing type issues to raise those. Yes. But it is policy, and in some ways I'm straying into policy when I make comment upon it. We deal with these matters, and we deal with these within the processes that we have, and I suggest that we would deal with those fairly.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that you're not dealing with them fairly, and I realise that you have to work with what you're given by the Department of Justice and the Minister for Justice, or whatever they drive. My question is, even the Minister told us that he was having to bring in some counsel to look at a number of cases. So it would appear that, to us anyway, that there doesn't seem to be full confidence in GSOC to actually sort these problems if he's having to bring in counsel to actually review some of them. So, and while I'm not saying that you're responsible for the process, but you're the one who has to work with it. And my question is, if you think the process, if you're happy with the nature of the process.
Well, for my part, and speaking for my responsibilities, I'm content with the manner in which we've dealt with these protected disclosures. Yes.
Right, you're not answering my question. Anyway, right, okay. I also asked him last week about the fact that I know there's been a couple of suspensions of senior players in the organisation of late, and while I'm not being critical at all, I asked him if there, and I'm asking you now, is there going to be a change of policy when people are, when there's complaints about people? Do you see it as the way forward to actually suspend them pending the result of the investigation? Because we weren't seeing this before now, and to be honest, we would have called for the suspensions of some individuals where those cases going on for a few years, and no one was being suspended, and some even got promoted while they were supposed to be under investigation. I'm just asking, are you being in a change of policy in this area and looking at suspending people pending the result of the investigations?
Well, each of these cases are dealt with as individual matters. As we speak, they are seized off various courts and tribunals, so it's very difficult for me to talk about them, but in respect of a change of policy, no, it is the application of the policy in the specific cases as they arose.
Right, and okay, just on the matter of a suspension, I won't name the individual right, but there was a suspension on January 3rd. Are you happy that all the documents went to GSOC? And not just the ones that maybe the Gardaí would have deemed relevant, but are GSOC being allowed to assume what's relevant, and are they getting all the documents, or are ye sending them what ye deem relevant?
We are providing every assistance to GSOC in respect to that investigation, and they're being exhaustive in terms of our support and the provision of documents to GSOC. You can be assured of that. So
you're happy that all necessary all documents have gone to GSOC?
Yes.
Yeah. My last question on
it is.
It is, yeah. On IT. Through no fault, you weren't around, but we've had a lot of discussions in here over the last couple of years about the role of a censure, and we were given some contradictory answers in here that didn't stack up by one of the individuals involved. We have highlighted huge discrepancies in how this has been operated and crazy costs. A lot of it poorly monitored. Are you going to take a look at the type of contracts you've been having with the likes of Accenture, or are you happy to progress as normal?
In some ways, I think I should give a written response to that, but I would say that my role as Commissioner is to make sure that we spend our money, our taxpayers' money, as efficiently as possible. So when we're looking for the provision of services, particularly services which are long-lasting but also integral to the delivery of the policing function, then I have to look to the most efficient and effective manner of doing that. So the issues you raise, I will then give a longer written response in respect of the specifics that's been raised.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Deputy
Thank
Wallace.
you.
Thank you. Senator Martin Conway to be followed by Deputy Jack Chambers.
Caoimhghín, and I'd like to welcome the Commissioner and his team here this morning. And I suppose to start on a positive note in terms of public confidence, I do believe that the public have significant confidence in your leadership style and the fact that you're out and about and going around the country and meeting people and engaging, and that's extremely important. But I suppose just a little bit of context in terms of where Deputy Daly and I suppose her questioning in terms of the draft report and the policing authority. And I suppose just from my perspective, to put it in context, I'm on this committee now 8 years, and we've had a number of your predecessors in here, and getting information from them to a large extent was like drawing teeth. Extremely difficult, and so that is the context in terms of a draft report. I would be concerned about a draft report, and I do understand the logic in terms of discipline and those issues, and they are important. And I'm not going to go down the line that Deputy Daly, because she has exhausted it to a large extent. Are the policing authority happy with the delay in providing the draft report and the reasoning for it? Have you got an opinion from them? Are they satisfied with the delays in terms of making it available to them and, I suppose, by extension, putting it in the public domain?
Well, this was raised in, I think, a private and the public session on the 17th of January. We undertook to provide a report before the next public session, which is the 24th of February, and we are on track to do that.
So you're confident then that on the 24th of February that the report will be escalated and whatever issues you are concerned about regarding discipline, that either they'll be dealt with or redacted?
Well, the issues around the potential for discipline will be redacted.
Okay, well, I think that's reasonable. In terms of where Deputy Wallace and the protected disclosure, Deputy Wallace asked a couple of the questions that I was going to ask, but I'd just be wondering how many protected disclosures are before you at the moment?
Well, I don't want to mislead here. I'm not entirely sure of that figure.
Okay.
There. I would need to just confirm that.
Yeah, I would just want to get an understanding as to the level of protected disclosures that are being made available to you.
Yes.
Now, you've spoke about IT and the development of structures and obviously the significant costs involved. We've seen, I suppose, in recent years within Garda Síochána serious difficulties in terms of, if you want to call it, IT malfunction or challenges with IT or human error associated with IT. Are you confident now that all information that's processed and collected at checkpoints is properly escalated up the system and is properly accounted for in terms of your statistics, and that the proper actions are being taken and appropriate actions are being taken by officers? Do you think that any errors are within the level of not mattering in terms of from a statistical perspective, or do you think there are still issues there?
If I can pass that to John, just talk specifics of that intervention.
I think with specific reference to the checkpoint information and the data, a lot of changes were made at the time which ensured that the correct information is captured at the time that is necessary. So there have been a lot of improvements made. With any system, I think we've mentioned here on previous occasions that Pulse was designed as an incident recording process, and we were transitioning that and asking it to do something for which it was not designed originally, and that was an investigation management system. A lot of the changes that have been made over the years have brought in the necessary improvements that we require, but it is something that we continue to oversee and have a look at on a daily basis. Where you have human people involved in it, it will bring the normal, natural human frailties that we all possess. So it's something we look at every day, and I think that's what the Commissioner alluded to about the work of the professional standards earlier on. Oversight and governance and constantly checking is something that has to continue on a daily basis and into the future to ensure that we minimise any issues, or that we identify them at the earliest opportunity, and that we continue to improve the system. So I'm happy that the changes that have been brought in address the issues that you've raised in your question, but it's something that we'll continue to monitor.
So essentially then, obviously the human element of it is what's inserted into the handheld, but in terms of the handheld being put onto a docking station type system to upload information, you're satisfied that that's essentially foolproof at this stage?
Well, that's the technology that we're going to use going forward. A handheld device is as powerful as a PC was 4 or 5 years ago, and using that technology, then we can get members out of their stations, out in the ground, and they're able to input directly, and that's what we seek to do. We have to just. The difficulty with technology is technology moves on. We'll never get to an end state where we are in respect of technology. The public expect, new ways of being able to communicate with us, so we have to open that up in terms of social media, but also online reporting. But then our members as well, they themselves lead very connected, switched on lives, and they expect the same in the workplace and how they work, and it's an efficient way of working. But we won't get to an IT system which is devoid of human error and constant analysis to make corrections and make adjustments and make improvements, and then also subject to big updates, because technology itself isn't standing still at any time.
Okay, you're in the job now in around 6 months. Is there any other areas that's jumping out at you that may lead to reputational damage or reputational risk with the force at the moment? Is there anything that has come to light that you are concerned about that you'd like to share with us this morning?
No, nothing else that strikes me as I sit here today. I've made it very clear to the organisation, very clear to my senior leadership team, of the behaviours and exemplary behaviours that I expect of individuals. I expect them to be compliant with the Code of Ethics in their behaviours in the workplace. As we move forward, and as required by the Commission on Future Policing, we are going to more and more concentrate on providing human rights policing, and that sets out very firmly the behaviours that are expected in the organisation. And that will become real. Those are the behaviours that I will expect, and I'll be entirely unstinted in expecting those and demanding them of everyone who works for Garda Síochána.
Two just final questions. Just in terms of structure and organisational change, and I suppose referring to my own area of the Midwest, obviously our very good Chief Superintendent John Kearns retired at Christmas, and we'd like to wish him well. He was a super member of Garda Síochána. And there is a concern in Clare, I suppose, how long it's going to take to carry out, to fill the position of Chief Super. And secondly, an issue that has come up in terms of Clare being I suppose, joined up with the Galway division for one district. Now, people in Clare wouldn't like to see that happen. We believe that the Clare, obviously, division should stay as it is. Can you give the people of County Clare any assurances that the Clare Garda division will remain as is? And when are you expecting to make the appointment of Chief Super?
The appointment of Chief Super is probably the easier question to answer there. Yes, we will seek to make that appointment as soon as possible. We're expecting actually to get the clearance from that for that next week. In respect of what the divisional structure is going forward, no, I can't give assurances really at all, because we are working through a process as required by the Commission of Future Policing to work towards a new operating model, which is in effect a new divisional model. What our intention is that the divisional model, headed by a Chief Superintendent, will become the principal unit of providing policing in Ireland, that a divisional commander should have sufficient resources that by and large they are able to deal with the majority of what happens in their division, but also then to make sure that we have sufficient numbers, including supervision, sergeant and inspectors, to make sure that the local service is properly delivered, properly supervised and properly supported. So we haven't come to the end of our considerations around that. We are to produce a new plan this year in 2019 towards implementation towards the tail end of this year and into 2020. But as I sit here now, I can't give assurances in respect of what the divisional structure will look like going forward.
That's fine. And in terms then, we've seen in recent weeks significant reports in the media about protests at the homes of key politicians. And we saw that actually happen last Sunday in a despicable way at Minister Harris's home. I suppose my question to you is, are you now looking at reviewing security at the homes of key ministers in government and members of the judiciary and other key stakeholders in terms of our society and the political and the judiciary?
Well, forgive me if I don't address the specific security issues that you ask in that question. If I can say in general, we are here to protect democracy, and part of that is also then to protect the institutions and those individuals who are integral to those institutions as well. So we won't fail to do that. I can say in respect of protests which are mounted close to or at people's homes, that is a scaling up of what one would call legitimate protest activity, and those who engage in that would need to understand that they need to be sure that they do not engage in any shape or form in behaviour which could be regarded as a breach of the peace or intimidatory. We will have no tolerance to that. Demonstrating outside a government building is an entirely different kettle of fish from demonstrating at somebody's home.
Thank you. And finally, just in terms of new Garda stations, are you proposing to reopen Stepaside Garda Station, or is there plans to open other Garda stations in the Dublin area over the coming months?
The Senator was obviously asked to ask this question.
No, I wasn't actually. I wasn't at all.
Not by a government minister either, I'm sure.
Because I have some stations in Clare I'd like to see reopened as well.
Step aside was the one question I didn't anticipate. So
I was being facetious, by the way, Martin.
If I may be allowed to report back on step aside, please.
That's fine.
I think we'll have to accept that. Thank you, Senator. Well done. Deputy Jack Chambers, in terms of current members present, followed by Senator Niall O'Donnell.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to thank the Commissioner and his team for coming before us. Just my first question relates to the one thing I noticed from your report was that there's been a reduction in the rate of referral to the Youth Diversion Service quite significantly from, say, 2010 up to 2017. Seems to be a significant trend downwards to the rate of referral. What do you see as the reason for that being?
I'll ask Paul just to
I think we've seen over the years when the JLO diversion referral system came in 2010, it went from a paper-based system to a pulse-based system, an electronic system. And I suppose early days there was a lack of an awareness because there was a little training provided. But over time, you do see that awareness growing and the requirements that are needed in order to make that referral. So you can see once the level is reached, people become aware over time as to what's required of them. And that would be one of the reasons why the level has dropped.
Yeah, because it's just like when you look at, say, 28,000 in 2011, down to 18,000, 2016, 11 something in 2017. So it's quite a change. Just on the issue of the rate of inaction. So that's obviously fallen from 7.3% to a matter that you've properly addressed, and it's important we recognise that. But what I want to know is, obviously 2014 there was an awareness from the inspector's report that there was a serious issue with this, and actions were taken internally to address that. What I want to know is, was there engagement or communication with the Department of Public Prosecutions at that stage to address the resurrection of some investigations that may have fallen through the gap? Because obviously we have an awareness now of the serious matter, and it's in the public domain, and there's engagement about potential resurrection of investigations. But was it done at that stage regarding the communication between the Gardaí and the Department of Public Prosecutions, so that you could mitigate the rate of inaction that you discovered?
Yeah, I suppose in November 2014, when the Inspectorate raised this in the report, we didn't have that level of detail available to us. It's only after our own GPSU conducted their inquiry and I suppose come up with the figure of 22,174 that my team was assigned to have an in-depth examination of that. And at that stage then we liaised with the DPP and we have met them on a number of occasions.
So when did you first meet the DPP?
Last year.
Okay.
2018.
Like, I think that's an important learning point because we've probably missed the boat for the resurrection of many prosecutions, which I think is regrettable. The fact that you knew in 2014 and we've allowed a 2-year window to develop without addressing it. I understand obviously you have to have an internal process to address the issues, but I think for victims that will be a disappointment that it took from nearly a 4-year window to have proper engagement with the DPP around the resurrection of prosecutions. And on that point, there's 7,894 were not appropriately progressed, and that equates to 5% of all referrals. Like, have you any indicative figure of what percentage of that will be resurrected? Like, have the DPP established a specific team to see what they can resurrect, or what they can do to try and rectify the scale of this, and what's been the feedback from them regarding that?
So 7894 has to look. There's a lot of matters there which are summary, and so they are statute barred, and they'll not be retrieved. So the vast majority actually through statute bar are lost, and so what we have then is a small, and of that 7894, a very small proportion of cases which are still a subject of discussion. But time has passed.
What's small, like 1,000, less than 1,000?
Well, no, you're down into double figures.
So we've under 100 that are okay being considered.
So I would say there's difficulties as well, but these are matters then that we are in discussion with the director about, because there's been considerable time delay here, which you have pointed out yourself.
I know, I acknowledge that. I suppose what I see as the learning point is that obviously when there was an awareness internally about a serious issue, that I think there should have been an engagement with the DPP at that stage, so that I know it's obviously we're looking back, matter having been addressed, but I think if some other issue arises, we shouldn't allow time to remove the criminal process, and I think that's regrettable. Yeah, hopefully, I suppose you've under 100 then is what's being addressed.
But what you outline is, is the kernel of the seriousness of this, is that indictable prosecutions and other prosecutions have been lost.
Yeah.
We are trying to retrieve what we can,
Yeah, no, I
but whether we're successful or not, we have to see.
Yeah, I acknowledge that. Just regarding there's obviously, you mentioned in your presentation, issues of supervision which were identified across many of the appearances of Garda Síochána before this committee, and I know that relates to recruitment and around a lot of positions in middle management not being filled over time. And you mentioned that the National Bureau for Child Diversion has been established and Chief Superintendent is now in situ, which is positive. Just can you give an outline of what the responsibility structure was when this was going wrong? What was the leadership or responsibility structure when this was all going systematically wrong? So when there was a rate of 7%, what was the structure within the Gardaí to actually that allowed that to occur?
Yeah. So look to John just to give an explanation of what was happening during that time.
The prosecutions and the prosecution of offenders rest at a local level, at a district and divisional level. And I think we alluded earlier on to previous reports and Pulse being an incident recording process. And the line of sight of people at various different levels wasn't what it should have been.
Yeah.
So that a superintendent didn't have a view of all of the prosecutions. And we're talking big numbers here, we're talking hundreds of thousands. And that was one of the key weaknesses of the system at that particular time. And that's what's fed into this issue that we are dealing with here. So if we look at one issue and why the Pulse 6.8, as we talk about, had such a change, is that began to provide supervisors at all levels with the information that they required to fulfil their role and obligation of the governance. So while we have policymakers at the centre, we have the people with responsibility at a district and a divisional level. But in light of all these cases, and we see 158,000 cases now. That's only since the IT system was brought into bear. It was only in 2015, in the end of 2015, when we provided the facility for people at district and divisional level to have oversight and proper governance of it. So there has been a considerable change and an improvement. We've also enhanced the role of the National Bureau to provide a specific resource to provide the governance from a national level also.
Global view.
So they're the critical changes that have been brought into it now.
Yeah, and I think it's good that we have a global view now of it, but I suppose it goes back to some of the, say, criticisms that I'd hear, which is if a basic matter may be reported, it might be a serious crime, and I know if it's a serious crime, at least there is a formal engagement for people there. But sometimes people feel the crime they report is just lost. They don't know if the investigation is closed or if there's no end to it, or what the outcome of it is. And I think there could be an accountability process from the public side where, maybe you as a public awareness initiative should develop a pilot where you're encouraging people to check where their reported crime is at, so that they know, and then that provides an internal change where there's an ongoing kind of active awareness that we need to either close this because we can't get the intelligence or the information, or there is a movement on it. But I think that's the general feedback sometimes people receive, that it could be a burglary and there mightn't be anything for Gardaí to act on that can occur, but it's better they know that, or that it's fed into a general intelligence-led operation against a particular cohort, but that they can't act on it now. But I think that's some of the negative drift that sometimes is placed on your feet, which mightn't be fair. But I think it would allow I suppose, an external level of accountability where the public can actually have an input so that they know what the outcome of their thing is, even if it mightn't be there. So I don't know if have you looked at anything on that basis?
Yeah, we have, and we have a number of processes in place where we try to deal with it. The first thing is a written letter is issued to an individual victim of crime, and that will give them the pulse incident number and the investigating member. And there are various different letters that will issue periodically along the process as it evolves, if someone is brought to court, and various different issues. I spoke earlier about the Victim Service Office that is available at every division. I also spoke about an individual liaison officer that is appointed specifically for the more serious crimes. So we do try and have an escalation process to deal with the crime, and as it is, the more serious it is, the more specific response that we have in relation to it. It's something we watch closely, a public attitude survey which comes out every quarter. It's something that we take a specific interest, and we are constantly looking to improve the service. The issue of victims was discussed at the most recent senior leadership team meeting, looking at a specific action in relation to the information that the victims of crime are provided with and the time that they are done. So it is something that's on our agenda all the time. It is something that we're looking to continually improve, and we have seen some considerable improvements over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Just finally, Chair, just a couple of things, just to maybe provide an update. Can you tell us where do you provide an update on where obviously you made changes to breath testing, where that's at, issues with the fixed charge notices? Has that matter been squared off and addressed in terms of the legal process that you had to undertake with the fixed charge notices and the difficulties you had there? Like, have the people who were incorrectly issued with them, has that all been dealt with? Where is that? How many are left? Or maybe you can update us again. And then also just provide an update on the last time you were at the committee, you mentioned the pilot around submitting real-time information and how that will, I think, improve the IT system that you have, where things can be submitted when Gardaí are out externally rather than having to submit information on their return, and how that can create difficulties with the quality of the information that's submitted. Where is that at? Will it be rolled out on a broader basis across all stations? And then the final question, Chair, and thanks for your time, is Garda stations were mentioned, and we've had a lot of political controversy around step aside, rightly so. I think you as a force led a certain path regarding created a path where there's only one end point, but that's not at your door as far as I'm concerned. But I would like to ask, there is growing populations across the suburbs of Dublin. How are you changing I look at, say, my own area in West Dublin. I don't want to get parochial about this because there's other areas, but in terms of the allocation of numbers, like we've got census changes in the population, we've got serious crime in certain areas more so than others, like where we don't have drugs units in some areas, but there might be historic retention of drug units in areas that mightn't have the same level of or issues around drugs. So I just want to know, what are you doing to I suppose, recalibrate numbers within divisions to appropriately address the levels of crime that are there? And are you looking at the levels of response times across divisions and allocating Gardaí on that basis? Because I think there are some divisions that, and I talk to Gardaí who would say that they might be stationed in a particular division but don't envy the Gardaí that are in other divisions. So they might be in sleepy places that don't have the same levels of crime, and I wouldn't like to take Gardaí away from areas that have low levels of crime. But I just want to know what you're doing, because that is an issue in terms of the Gardaí is a national force, and how are we apportioning numbers properly so that areas that have poor response times are getting the units or the numbers that are required? Thanks, Chair.
Well, if I take that last question first, this is This is what we want to work through with the new operating model. We have to look at the expansion of Dublin and other urban centres and be certain that our response over the next 5 to 10 years of the policing issues, that the growth of population and indeed new population centres or expanding population centres are going to create in terms of what our policing response in those areas should be. So, over this year, we are charged through the Commission on Future Policing in creating the plans that in effect will be the blueprint for the organisation next 5 to 10 years. We are fortunate and we are a growing organisation. Not only are we receiving additional sworn members, but the uplift in particular around Garda staff will allow us to displace more to the front line. But then even beyond that then, the increase in Garda Reserve, and we have to come back with a plan in respect of that. And again in this year, will also see us increase visibility. So I am very conscious about the visibility of guards to make sure that they're not actually getting embedded into stations because of work that has to be done there. But there is an element of mobility and the element of that Gardaí are doing jobs that require a warrant, which they hold. So that is very much the direction of the organisation to really improve our operational footprint in response to change in demand, and part of that is growing demand and the population issues that arise. Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Chambers.
Are you going to just a real time? Just
Please. I beg your pardon.
And the aspects of the question, the mobility programme, I think, is what you refer to in one earlier part of it. That is has been tested in the Limerick division, and the intention is to roll out in the region of 2,000 mobile devices over the course of 2019. And that is an important step forward in that it provides real-time information to people at the point that they need it, which is out on the street. So that's a welcome development. The second part of it then is in relation to the FCPS issue and the payment of it. That work has progressed, but we will need to come back to give final figures to the committee in terms of what the final make-up was of people that wrote into us. It was dealt with, I think, over a period of a couple of months. I know some of them ended up in the court cases, but we'll have to write back to the committee.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner.
Fine, thank you.
All right, Deputy Chambers, again, thank you very much indeed. Senator Niall O'Donnell, please, to be followed. In this situation, I think Deputy Martin Kenny, then to be followed by Deputy Peter Fitzpatrick, in that order. Please. Senator.
Caoimhghín, Chair, apologies first of all to you and colleagues. I hope I haven't been too disruptive over here, coughing and spluttering the whole way through the meeting, so you'll forgive me. It's not a deliberate destabilising tactic or anything like that. Let me assure members.
The rest of us, whatever.
No, I don't intend to. There's a safe distance. Commissioner, just in relation to an earlier question that Deputy O'Leary asked in relation to the 55 cases of serious offences and the young people in question accepting responsibility, Chief Superintendent Cleary said that he couldn't say in relation to those specific 55 cases, but I wonder if that's maybe something that could be furnished afterwards.
Oh yes.
Is that okay? Yes, fair enough.
Yes, we can provide that information. It's just not on our fingertips now.
No, well, that's fair enough, and I appreciate that. We're at that stage in the meeting where a lot of questions have been asked, so I intend to be brief, Commissioner. It's been suggested that some of the difficulty that arose in these instances is due to the fact that at one point there was a centralised system in which all the names of the relevant young people and juveniles were kept. This was replaced for potentially good reasons, I accept, by a system where there had to be a dialogue between the juvenile liaison officer and the arresting officer who was potentially dealing with any amount of cases, both juvenile and adult. This requirement for constant feedback meant that a significant number of the cases fell through the gaps. I've seen that reported, and I'm wondering if, Commissioner, you or your colleagues, what your view would be in relation to this being one of the contributing factors in terms of the overall numbers, and just hearing your view in terms of how we may deal with that going forward.
Well, undoubtedly, the feedback loop, the lack of awareness about the system that had been put in place and then the absence then of knowing exactly what has happened with these cases. So when they were deemed not suitable, then they went back to the arresting or detecting member, and that's where the breakdown was. They then had the responsibility to lift that, but undoubtedly some of them were lost, maybe through workload, some were lost just lack of knowledge, but at the same time 96% of these were dealt with properly. And even when you look at the 55,000 odd that were returned for investigation, the great proportion of those are dealt with properly. So we have to think that there's two elements to this, systems, training, briefing, whatever that might be. But secondly, then, in the end, they were asked to do a basic skill, or what's an elementary skill for any member, which is prepare a file and submit that for consideration of prosecution. So, and that didn't happen. So, it's a big step to consider. Is there discipline in respect of 3,400 members? But in the end, it just ultimately kept on coming back to that in so many cases we got this right. You just can't say it's about the system.
Yeah, Chair, thanks. I had a number of questions around the issue of disciplinary process, but I think, to be fair, they've been exhausted by Deputy Daly, so I won't go into that. Just to take us back to an earlier point that you raised, Commissioner, and indeed take us back to your last appearance in front of the meeting, the committee. I want to welcome the fact that you've met with the Justice for the Forgotten group, and you'll remember, I'm sure, that I had raised the issue of the Dublin and Monaghan bombings at your last appearance. One of the ongoing demands of the families affected, the victims and the survivors, has been that the Gardaí has received all of the information that they requested from the PSNI, and I was told at the time that, had I furnished that in the form of a question prior to the last meeting, that maybe you could have updated us on that. So I just wonder, given the passage of time and the meeting with the relevant families, is there any update in terms of the PSNI furnishing Garda Síochána with all of the relevant information that they have requested in relation to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings? And just lastly, Chair, the issue arose the last time, Commissioner, you'll remember, in relation to the outstanding request by the solicitors of the family of Dennis Donaldson for his journal, which Gardaí have stated is of no evidential significance for them. Just to remind you what you said to me, Commissioner, at the last meeting, I recently received correspondence to the same effect, and it is being dealt with. I will report to the committee when a conclusion is reached. The specific point the Senator raises has been raised in the correspondence from the family solicitor. It is a live issue, and we will have a response quickly. So my understanding in correspondence from the families is that they have received, nor their solicitors haven't received, any update in relation to the journal, and if there is one, could you perhaps furnish us with that? Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Senator. Thank you. Commissioner.
Well, in respect of the Dennis Donaldson and the journal, we have just only in this week received further correspondence from the Police Ombudsman. So our interaction in respect to that journal had been with the Police Ombudsman and the provision of information from that journal to the Police Ombudsman, and they state that they are content that they've received all the information that they require from the journal. But the journal itself does contain information which we don't think is appropriate that it goes out and just into the public domain. So we have yet to respond yet to the solicitor, and I just want to be absolutely certain of the legal position I'm in respect of this. It's been dealt with and very carefully considered over a number of years, and in effect I'm coming in almost at the very tail end of these considerations, and we have really finished our interaction with the Police Ombudsman, but there's an overall view in respect of the journal and what it contains, and I have to be just certain of our position in respect of that.
Okay, so where has the change been in terms of it being identified as having no evidential value to the investigation to now? What you're saying, where has the change in that? Because as I understand it, and certainly I'm trying to recall this on the hoof, but in engaging with the family, and certainly as I understand their solicitors have outlined it, they have been informed that there's no evidential value, I think was the term, and I may be paraphrasing in relation to that. So I wonder why the solicitors can't then be furnished, whether in a redacted form even, or a confidential form, that it wouldn't be released publicly but would be made available to the family and their solicitors.
Well, there is material in it which has been provided to the police ombudsman. So that is information or evidence for their inquiry. So, they've been given the relevant sections of the journal to advance their inquiry. So to say it's of no evidential value is not correct. It is of evidential value to an ongoing, very obviously legitimate inquiry. But even then, beyond that, it does contain information which would describe personal nature, but not just relating to Mr. Donaldson or the Donaldson family. And I need to get legal opinion then in respect of that. I feel I've been in breach of data protection to release it in its present form.
Okay, but obviously that's a change from, you haven't said previously that you would try and do that as speedily as possible. I think you said it's a live issue and we will have a response quickly. So the response is essentially that the families won't be getting the journal at this stage.
Well, no, and I just want to be absolutely certain of the decision making on that. The first thing I actually undertook was to make sure that in terms of our responsibilities to support the Ombudsman investigation, that had happened, and I'm content in respect of that.
Okay. And in relation to the Dublin and Monaghan requirements and the Gardaí request of information from the PSNI, you content that you've been furnished with all of the relevant information?
We may have to just come back and just clarify that.
That's what you told me the last time, but okay.
I think what we said the last time was that we're not aware, and that as far as we're concerned, all of the issues are addressed. But we will come back to you.
Okay. Sure. Thanks, Chair.
I will make a brief reference to that just at the end myself, because there is another aspect to it. Deputy Martin Kenny, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and I want to thank you, Chairman, particularly as I'm not a member of this committee, for having the opportunity to be here this morning, and I thank the Commissioner and his team for coming in with regard to this particular issue. The issue of the juvenile diversion programme is something that I raised about, I think it was October 2016, in regard to a particular case that had come to me. And I was assured at the time that there were no issues and that everything was being done appropriately and properly. The particular case which I raised, and I raised it again a few weeks ago in the Chamber, was in regard to an issue of a young girl who was the victim of a serious sexual assault. The perpetrators of that assault were basically caught red-handed on CCTV. They admitted what they had done. And to the horror of the family and the victim, they were informed that there was simply a caution and that they were deferred to the juvenile diversion programme. They were not consulted or asked did they want that. They were just told this is what had already happened. And since then, the particular victim in this case has suffered greatly and has had huge difficulties in her life, and has been able to know, because as we all know, certainly in rural Ireland, communities know what goes on around them, and they have seen these people who were the culprits in this case and admitted this continue with their lives pretty uninhibited. And they feel very, very distressed and very severely annoyed that that is the case. And I will put it to you, Commissioner, that in cases of serious sexual assault, that the youth diversion programme is not an appropriate mechanism, and certainly should be considered very, very carefully before it would be considered as an appropriate way forward. And that, I know from looking up both the Garda website and other websites that, you know, when a young person is supposed to be deferred to this programme, they say that the young person must take responsibility for their offending behaviour, they must agree to be cautioned, and where appropriate agree to a term of supervision. And when I go to the website with citizens' information, they talk of going into much more detail about the Garda diversion programme. And now I know all this stuff was last updated in 2014, but they talk of a diversional programme having a conference where there would be a meeting with the family of the culprit and the Garda involve the officer involved in that, and that they would discuss the situation and that they would work out what programme of events will occur and all this. And to my knowledge, and certainly to what I'm hearing back from an awful lot of people that have contacted me around the country, basically what happens is there is a caution and there it ends. And certainly the victims feel of serious incidents. I absolutely concur that it is totally appropriate if a young person is in a minor enough offence, or even some serious offences, it is appropriate. But in many of these cases, for instance, there is a serious problem here where these young people who go down this programme may go on further to re-offend, and there is no assessment of their risk to others as appropriate as comes from that. So, I just like to really work out with you. My understanding is when an incident occurs and it's investigated, there is a file prepared, a culprit is identified or a potential culprit is identified. Where does that file go? What is the pathway of the process? And I'd just like to get detail on that, please.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I heard your interventions in respect of this, and I think I need to speak to you afterwards, because I wasn't able then to identify the specific case.
I don't want to be specific either.
But it would actually be good for me, I think, to look at the specific case, because there's feedback obviously that you're receiving from the victim and the victim's family, and it would be good to actually know some of the detail of that, and perhaps then provide further explanation to them what happened in this case. All children, and this is pursuant of the Children's Act 2001, where it is an absolute requirement, they must be considered in respect of this programme, that considered in terms of the diversion programme. And so that's the starting point. So any detection that's made is referred to the programme, and there is, one or two individuals who make the decisions on this. There is a director there who's a superintendent or chief superintendent, as it is now, and they make decisions in respect of these matters. They take a lot of factors into consideration, but when there's literally one person doing this, I think our decision making is consistent. I would like the opportunity actually to look at that individual case, and then perhaps we will provide a more tailored explanation to you, because some of the things that you raise then, I want to get back to you on as well, about how the victims are being treated and what the subsequent services are that are open to the young people. And as I sit here, I don't know the specifics of that case that you've raised with me to answer that.
I understand that. And I'm not to go into the specifics of the case. Really, the issue here is that in a case where there is a sexual assault, clearly there is the potential there. If it's an adult that carries out a sexual assault, there is an assessment of their future potential to offend. That is one of the things that happens. That does not happen, as far as I can see, in this particular situation, because while they may be referred, there is no compulsion on the culprit to attend, and it simply can die there. So I just feel that there is a serious problem here that needs to be, and while I raise a particular case, it is a general problem across the board.
Well, I'll seek clarification on that. If you're correct, and we're not considering juveniles in terms of what their subsequent risk of sex offending is, that would be a serious problem, but I wanted to get absolutely clear what the process is. I have looked at the management of sex offender processes that we have in place, and off the top of my head, I can't remember whether I asked whether juveniles were in that process or not. So I will have to come back and clarify that for you. But you are right there, that is a significant point to raise.
The other, Kenny, would you like to avail of the opportunity after the meeting to
yes, I certainly
speak
will.
to the Commissioner?
I will. And
he's offered that opportunity. I think you should.
Absolutely, I will. The other issue, which is somewhat connected, is in regard to a juvenile which continues to re-offend, where they have gone through the juvenile process and they have gone into the programme and they offend and they go into it again and again and again, up to a dozen times. And still, certainly in a community, and usually this is happening in a community, the community feel that the particular individual is being allowed to get away with everything for a considerable period of time. And the appropriateness of, while I absolutely agree that, of course, if a youngster gets in trouble and does the wrong thing, and they need to get a chance. They need to get a chance probably a number of times. But for that to continue and continue and continue to the stage that the community feel under threat by this person, and that has happened, and I have incidents of that happening. I think there needs to be some element where there has to be. We certainly feel that the carrot is needed, but certainly somewhere or other the stick has to come into play, and that isn't happening in some of these situations. So I just put that to you as well.
And understand entirely the point, and if I turn to Paul just to explain just how we set out to help with others to manage those who are recidivist youth offenders.
So we have a very successful initiative that was launched in recent years called JARC, Joint Agency Response to Crime, and that has been recently extended to YJARC, Youth Juvenile, and that concentrates on recidivist juvenile offenders. And I suppose with our external stakeholders into probation services and the Irish Prison Service and the guards, we ensure that those recidivist offenders are case managed. And there is that carrot and stick element to it, but they are encouraged to divert their behaviour away from criminal behaviour and antisocial behaviour. It's still very much in the early stages, but it's shown progress at the moment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Just finally, and go back to the victims in these situations, would you concur that their feeling of being let down, and certainly that they are not just let down, but probably to the extent that they feel that they have been re-victimised as a consequence of the situation that they find themselves in, that that Garda Síochána need to recognise that and acknowledge that?
Yes, and we've been very clear that victims have been let down. Matters were reported in good faith to Garda Síochána. We should have dealt with each and one of those properly, dealt with them efficiently and effectively. That didn't happen. We've let them down. We're going through a process of informing them, and indeed those in the more serious cases, we're doing personal visits to make sure that we, in effect, don't compound this earlier mistake by our treatment of them now. So that is an exhaustive process. It's underway at the moment, but I entirely concur. People have been let down, victims have been let down, and what they expected from us in terms of service we provide, and it didn't happen.
And would you concur that while the report is looking at the people who were deemed to be not suitable, but in some cases, and I accept it's probably a very small minority of cases where they were deemed to be suitable, that the actual youth diversion programme actually let them down when they were in it, let the victims down?
We have a lot of pride in our youth diversion programme where it works. If the feedback and you are giving me the feedback that some people are very dissatisfied as who are victims, then we need to address that, and you referred specific instances to me, and I think we have more to do, obviously, in respect of those. But from those, then perhaps we can learn more about the overall programme and how it works. Thank you.
Deputy Kenny, thank you. Deputy Peter Fitzpatrick, please.
First of all, Garda Commissioner, listen, I'd like to welcome you here today with your team. On July 19, 1991, Tom Oliver, a 43-year-old man from Riverstown, County Louth, a husband who had 7 children, a sheep farmer, no connection to any parliamentary or security forces, was abducted, tortured and brutally murdered by members of the Provisional IRA. His body was found across the border in Balik in County Armagh. He was shot in the head. A local priest who attended the post-mortem remarked that it looked like they dropped a concrete block on every part of his body. All his family is looking for is justice on who killed the father. In October 2012, you give evidence to the Smithwick's Tribune in closed session. Judge Peter Smithwick decided after consultation to publish. He stated that you told him, based on intelligence files compiled by the PSNI and the IUC and M15, the British Security Services, you spoke about the killing of Tom Oliver, and about one intelligence file was nothing short of sensational. File number 9 stated, intelligence indicated that a senior Provisional IRA Council member was directly involved in the ordering of the murder of Tom Oliver. The senior Provisional IRA Army Council member had been approached by several Provisional IRA members and others requesting that Tom Oliver not to be killed. Despite this request, the senior Provisional IRA Army member directed that Tom Oliver be executed. You were then asked, did you know who that person was? And if so, would you pass on the information to the Gardaí? Your answer was yes. Ask if you would like to give the name of the arm.
Deputy Fitzpatrick.
I'm nearly finished, please.
If you would indicate what the nature of your question is.
Just one more sentence there. Ask if you would like to give the name of the Army Council member who sent Tom Oliver to his death. You opted to write it down and give the name to Judge Peter Smittix. This family has suffered since the murder. All I want to do is ask you, Garda Commissioners, where do you go from here? A fresh investigation is underway. Will you meet the family? And I just want to know what is actually happening. You're now the Garda Commissioner, and I just want to know what this family wants to know is what is happening from here on. Thank you.
Okay.
Deputy Fitzpatrick, I feel that the Commissioner will respond as he is in a position to respond if you're in a position to offer a reply today.
Well, I have met the family, and the family will be coming in to see me again over the next couple of months. And so they want an update on the review that Garda Síochána have committed to and indeed finished in respect to the abduction and murder of Tom Oliver. And so there'll be a further meeting with the family to brief them on that. The body of Tom Oliver was recovered in Bleak, South Armagh, so the Chief Constable PSNI has a jurisdiction for the investigation of that murder, and we will be assisting the PSNI in any review that they would do as well in respect of that murder.
Basically, it's like the name. What's happening with the name of this person of the IRA? What's actually happening at the moment? I hope it's not going to be buried. Where do we go from here?
That's no longer my information. That's information which is held by the Chief Constable in the Police Service of Northern Ireland. So that information is within his possession, and that's for him then to determine what actions then if he takes next.
Okay. To be honest, my main concern here is the family, and I'm delighted that you've already met the family, and I'm delighted that you're going to meet the family again, because it's the family who lost a father and neighbours lost a friend, and this person had no connection whatsoever with any parliamentary. To me, this was a very innocent man, and delighted, and all I'd like to see would be closure. And listen, thank you for your response. Thank you.
All right, Deputy Fitzpatrick, and thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner, if I could just myself, just in reference to the presentation, your presentation earlier on the substantive issue for address here today, in relation to the Garda Youth Diversion Programme. On the stills that we had before us here on the computer, the still, I think it's the second one, impact on victims. If I could just thank you, whoever's doing that for me. Is that you, Luke? Is it? Well, that's very good. So we all have one there before us. What I just want to ask in relation to those figures, Commissioner.
Yes.
You'll see 2,492 individual personal victims, 988 individual organisational victims. That comes to 3,480, which in my mind equates with the number of child offenders. It would strike me as very strange that the number of personal and organisational victims equated with the number of offenders when the actual number of crimes involved is 8,000 almost. I think from the previous slide, 7,894. Unless we're looking at something where recidivism is the case and we're looking at a coincidence of these figures. I mean, at the very bottom, I think, as one of my colleagues earlier pointed out, an interim report, all figures provisional, but the next line states all figures correct as of the 11th of February 19. Would you consider my observation that it would appear that they're not actually the accurate figures in relation to the impact on victims, individual and organisational. I wonder, would you like to offer a comment on that observation, please?
Well, yes. We're talking about victims, individual children, and then referrals. And also then some of the victims are repeat victims. And so you can imagine some of our retailers have been subject to many shoplifting type crimes. And also then the referrals themselves, they could be for more than one incident in terms of a child involved. So it's more, I think that's more coincidence than actually just in terms of our figures.
They just happen to coincide.
Yes, we looked at Paul just to provide a little bit more assurance to you around that.
I suppose the 7894 is the number of referrals where we found no follow-up. In that figure of referrals, there could be more than one offender. And we know that in the 7894 over 2000 and 2025, another person was made amenable for that particular crime. So that's where the number.
But you're confirming that the figures there, it's a coincidence, they're accurate.
Those figures are correct, and the figures are pretty complicated because we were talking about incidents or crimes, children, referrals, and then the amount of Garda members also involved. So there's almost like 4 strands, and if you cut them a different way, then you get into the thickets of numbers then pretty quickly.
Well, look, I accept your confirmation, your assurance. Thank you for that. Commissioner, what was the Garda Youth Diversion Programme preceded by? Maybe you're not conscious of that yourself. What was it referenced previously before it became known as this? Or what was its antecedent?
61 now, Kerry.
In 1963, this was introduced as a holistic way to divert children away from criminal behaviour. But there was no legal framework around it until 2001 with the Children's Act, and it became the Garda Youth Diversion Scheme then at that stage.
The Garda Youth Diversion Scheme, it has been known as that.
Yeah.
So, from all that I've read, the suggestion is that referrals are young people who have been or have been suspected of being involved in some level of crime or misdemeanour, whatever the seriousness of the thing. Are other children incorporated, are children who have not come to Garda attention within a specific community setting? Have they been involved, introduced, brought into this in some way?
I think anecdote would suggest in the 80s and 90s wasn't the same adherence to prima facie case, whereas individual Garda members could see that a young person was perhaps going astray, and they were introduced to the scheme as an intervention. And I think some of the diminution of the numbers is that we've been more strictly applying prima facie case, and plus obviously an acceptance of their role in that. And I'm not entirely sure whether that's a good thing or not. I think, a process for those even before they tip into an actual offence is not a bad thing, that there's an intervention, and that early intervention may just entirely prevent any form of further reoffending. So it's not to say that what happened in the past was incorrect. It seemed to work for a lot of people. That's not the process we have now, which has become perhaps more codified.
Well, I just, in this particular line of questioning, I'd ask, there are different degrees of seriousness. A young person could find themselves unintentionally associated with something.
Yes.
And being brought in under the Garda Youth Diversion Programme, it has at least a subliminal suggestion. We're diverting somebody away from a pathway that they would otherwise find themselves. And I wonder, just, is it properly titled, described? Is it fair? You know, there are levels of seriousness. You know, youth diversion project, programme, you know, in some cases, that association is almost a labelling of the young person who might never at all throughout the rest of their lives ever find themselves in conflict with yourselves or societally.
And in the vetting of an individual, we are very conscious of that. And, you know, and indeed, I know that we would take a very, you know, careful view of somebody. If somebody has an interaction with the youth diversion scheme, we never see them again, then, you know, we give them the benefit of the doubt because they received their caution, they went through the scheme, and they've responded appropriately. But what we also have is, which we wouldn't have had 20 years ago, you know, restorative justice schemes, but also then, you know, nationally there's over, I think, 100 other sort of diversion schemes as well. So there are other processes then to try and divert young people away, and you know, it is beneficial work because it prevents crime, and you know, it saves people from a cycle of offending.
A child who, and I call them for what they are, a child who finds themselves brought into the programme, does that, even though they're a child, does that remain in terms of, we'll say, in future life, any inquiry as to their past? Does that reflect itself in any way in terms of life's path and prospects?
No, it doesn't. No.
It doesn't.
No.
It doesn't present.
No.
It's something that's held strictly.
Yes, held strictly.
Right. Okay.
And you know, no, it doesn't impact after that.
The report you gave us at the outset indicated that the Gardaí have written to almost all of the 3,400 victims.
Yes.
If that is the figure. Offering an apology and support. What would the support entail? The apology we can understand, but an apology and support, other specific supports. I mean, I would expect, you indicate in your opening address that the helpline established received 35 relevant calls and there have been 16 emails.
Yes.
And that's out of, I'm presuming, the greater number of the, whatever number of thousands of victims involved.
Yes.
Coincidentally, the same almost number of perpetrators. You know, in that particular situation, what are you offering to people in those cases? And the numbers, you know, you're looking at 51 out of some thousands, presumably corresponded with. Can you give us a sense of, you know, what they were seeking when they responded? Were they themselves looking for anything in particular? Were they encouraging following through, as colleagues questioned earlier, in relation to not letting the most serious matters lie in abeyance, that they would be picked up and pursued?
The helpline was put in place because we realised when the news broke, some people would think, you know, whether correctly or incorrectly, that they may impact on them, so as to provide immediate clarification to individuals who may have reported crime in this period and then were worried that their case was not properly dealt with. So we were able to, you know, in that we were able to specify a number of victims. That also tells us exactly who those victims are as well, by name and location. So we were able to confirm to people whether they were included or not, and if they were included, then to flag them then to their district officer in terms of an individual who made contact. And rather than just the letter, we found as we've gone along that when the district officers and their teams have brought their eye to bear on the individuals they're dealing with, that their local knowledge can tell them, well, you know, there's particular sensitivities, and indeed in some tragic cases, quite a bit of re-victimisation, and so therefore it wouldn't be appropriate to send a letter that this is a case for personal contact. And so in effect, we think there'll be more personal visits than we had initially anticipated, so we deal with people appropriate. And in other cases there, we decided not to send a letter because now the information that we have is out of date. The victim may have been deceased, it may have been a tourist or just a temporary resident and no longer can be found. So that's part of the issue around the victimology as well. But in dealing with this, we asked the district officers, you know, in the first place to think about the victims and make sure that outward-facing bit was done and done well, and then, you know, in tandem, but with a concentration in the first place about the victims, to do the consideration around, you know, individuals, and a consideration then is discipline appropriate.
Okay. In relation to the serious crimes, of which there are 55 indicated, from your examination of these, and I presume they have been examined carefully, what percentage of recidivism is presented in terms of those specific offenders? For instance, in relation to the rape case, I mean, in that particular instance, has any further incidents of sexual offending presented to your knowledge, and some of the other serious cases? And can you indicate to us that these most serious cases have been reopened by An Garda Síochána for examination, investigation and indeed processing towards justice?
I need to look at all of those. I know all of the cases and I've read and I've read the back summary of those cases and the individuals. We can give you a response in terms of recidivism or offending before and then recidivism after this. But some of these cases, I have to say, whenever you look in the detail can identify the individual, and I can give a private explanation of that because indeed one or two of them are very sensitive cases, and if I give a fuller account in public, it would identify victim and perpetrator just in the peculiarities of the case. But we can, in general, we can say who has offended or what was the offending history leading through this. I think it is a characteristic of this group is that they had, by and large, they had repeated ongoing contact with An Garda Síochána through incidents and through offending, and so there
into adult life,
indeed on into adult life as well. So there's a small group that we, less than 10%, that we never hear of again, but the 90%, there's a large amount of contact again, both as a child and then ultimately as an adult.
Yes, well, I appreciate in relation to the greater number and whatever pathway some of them may have embarked on, but I'm very particularly concerned in relation to the rape case and other serious physical assault cases. I take it from your reply, Commissioner, that there has been a degree of reoffending from within that cohort going on into adult life. I take it that that's what you're indicating to us.
I nearly don't want to indicate anything. I'd rather, in effect, we have a conversation out of the public domain because it's just peculiarities in respect of this, and each of these cases are individual. And when you get down to the very small numbers, you are dealing with a set of very individual facts, and you can't. I don't want to extrapolate principles or characteristics from those.
Well, let me just take the opportunity as chair of the committee. I want to commend you on taking the steps that you did in highlighting this. You were not historically responsible in terms of overseeing what happened, but I think the action that you took was absolutely correct. And the reason I'm asking the questions is to underscore just how serious the situation was, where young offenders were left unchecked, unchallenged, unprosecuted. And the consequence of that going on into later life was that they were going to repeat it. And I've no doubt that there has been a not insignificant level of that. And that really is the most serious aspect of the Garda Síochána's failure in this regard.
Well, there's two elements. Victims were let down, and indeed society was let down. But beyond that, then these children, as they were also let down because an opportunity for intervention was lost.
Yes. Just in relation to a number of the questions prompted one or two of my own thoughts on it. It had been indicated recently that not all members of the Garda Síochána were willing to or had signed the Code of Ethics. Can you indicate what is the situation in relation to that and what progress has been made to ensure that all sworn members are signatories to the Code of Ethics, which I think is something that most definitely they should do?
And yes, and I wholeheartedly support that. And the position is at the moment that everybody, all members have been through the training. The training is now complete. So that was a very extensive training programme, and in the order of 7,000 members have signed the Code of Ethics. But I can give you the precise figure because that figure keeps on creeping on up. As a consequence of that, I do not lose an opportunity, either in public or private, when I'm talking to members, to emphasise the importance of the Code of Ethics. And together with the policing authority, there's a constant focus on it. We are issuing a short video about the importance of the Code of Ethics to the organisation, and then that will be followed on then with a further intervention from myself in terms to each individual to again ask them to sign the Code of Ethics. But also then there's work ongoing with the various representative associations, so for them to throw their weight behind it as well. So it's had an uneasy arrival into the organisation, starting to stabilise it in terms of some of the things that were said about it. It's not an appendix to our discipline code. It sets out the standards that we expect of each other, and more importantly, the standards that the society expects of us. But it is an essential piece of setting out what our behaviours are in society, and that's going to be further built upon when we introduce more of a human rights ethos and emphasis on our policing function as well. So you're correct, this is a direction of travel. But I can also say that unless you've signed the Code of Ethics, you don't get promoted. Unless you've signed the Code of Ethics, really your career closes down. You're not invited into the specialisms, etc. So it's just not about asking. There's also then some teeth in this. So, but the important element around this is, I think, just when you stand back from it, we and Garda Síochána are here to protect the rule of law, and in doing so, we ourselves must set the most highest standards of ourselves. The Code of Ethics is a document which sets that out, and it's a living document in terms of providing guidance.
Okay, well then, the last point that I wanted to just say a few things on. When last you attended here, you undertook to meet with representatives of Justice for the Forgotten. It's already been asked of you. I understand that meeting took place on the 21st of November. I want to say thank you. That was an undertaking you gave to the committee. Is it planned, well, just a couple of, I'll put the questions together rather than individually. Is it planned to have a further meeting, and how soon might that take place? Can you confirm that you have appointed a new Garda liaison officer and that he or she is to meet shortly with Justice for the Forgotten? Just in following the situation in relation to the Dublin Monaghan bombings closely, I noted yesterday's a decision. The Crown Solicitor's Office yesterday appealed against the order of the Master of the High Court in Belfast to release a list of all documents in Crown possession pertaining to Dublin Monaghan. I understand that that initial decision of the Master was back in the 19th of December, but that the stay has now been introduced until the 1st of May. I'm just sharing that that happened yesterday in the in Belfast. But I asked you then, and I'll conclude with this, just have you in the period since you first appeared before the committee given consideration to what you yourself might do or could do to assist the relatives and surviving victims of the Dublin Monaghan bombings? And I know people from all parts of my community who were relatives of victims or survivors themselves. And, you know, the truth is what they want, first and foremost. Whether justice will follow is a moot question, but one that one would hope would follow. But they're anxious to ascertain all these years later as to who were responsible for those atrocities. And, you know, I wonder, have you, because of your unique position, having straddled police services on the island of Ireland, and now in the, you know, the lead position in terms of Garda Síochána, have you given any thought to what you might do or could do to help bring that situation about? And I conclude by saying, given that these Houses of Parliament, the Houses of the Oireachtas, have on 3 occasions unanimously requested the release of all relevant documentation in relation to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, and to no avail.
So we met with the families, and yes, we've re-established the Garden Liaison, and what we undertook to do was to consider this matter for, in effect, a serious case review. So we need to do an initial scoping of the material we have, and then see then do we embark on a serious case review. So we haven't finished that determination because the serious case review team is very much a finite resource, and there are other matters as well that we want to consider, other murders in effect that are also awaiting serious case review. But when we come to the determination of that, then certainly we'll meet again with the families and communicate to them their decision. But primarily that would be, I think, the main route that we as an investigative body, and charged yet with the responsibility to ensure a full investigation of this matter, could undertake. And I think that would be in keeping with our roles and responsibilities in terms of this. So that still remains under active consideration.
Okay, Commissioner. I suppose that's in terms of the body itself, the organisation of Garda Síochána. Just in relation to your own position and the fact that you have uniquely served in 2 representations of policing north of the border.
Yes.
I just ask you, and I'm not going to continue or repeat, put that to you, but I think, as I had raised it with you the last time, I think you indicated that you would consider and perhaps come back. Now, you did correspond back to the committee from your last meeting, but not on that particular matter. I thank you for the speed of your reply in relation to the matter you did address. But I'm asking now, and I ask just, is there any further, have you any further thoughts or consideration of specifically what you might be able to do?
Well, what I am able to do is as Commissioner there. And I have to say, although I was at a position of both Deputy Chief Constable and Assistant Chief Constable Crime, I had no engagement with this particular atrocity. So, what specifically I can do is now in the position of Commissioner. But this does rest fairly and squarely on my plate, because it remains an atrocity which is unsolved and which then should be subject to ongoing consideration. Not that we close it, but actually then do we consider then serious case review.
Fine. Okay. And you will be meeting again within a reasonable time frame with Justice Fulford.
Yeah. So I say we'll come back to discuss the draft report that you're obviously going to be speaking to the policing authority about. Perhaps maybe an engagement in that in the near future mightn't be a bad idea.
You've indicated that's coming up in the coming week, perhaps, is that right?
And 24th February is the next policing authority meeting.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll correspond with you on that, Commissioner, and I think, as Senator Conway indicated, it would be appropriate that we'd have an opportunity to address the primary address of today's meeting in more particular detail. Deputy Daly, you wish to come back in?
There are just three quick areas, and
Members.
again, but just on Martin's thing first. About
one bite each.
Well, there's just three quick things, but the draft interim report, will you have that ready for the policing authority?
Yes.
Okay, and is it Paul's writing that, are you? Or who is the author?
Yeah, well, Paul's going to get my thoughts back on it, and it just needs tweaked in terms of the things I've already highlighted.
Yeah, okay. Just in terms of Pulse, because genuinely I think that that Pulse is the Guards Children's Hospital, and I actually think you can get to grips with it. And I know you're coming back to us with information, but on that, I think could I add in on that the whole issue of tendering, because the Minister and your predecessor gave the committee commitments before, obviously out of the problems arising from the Garda internal audit into the procurement breaches for the Accenture contract. We were told there was a new process underway and those contracts would be re-tendered, but I've looked at all the websites, I can't see any re-tendering at all except for the roster thing, which is completely separate. And I'm worried about stuff like the fact that you paid $7.7 million in 2017 for 49 IT staff from Accenture, only staff. It worked out that the Guards were paying Accenture for staff, on average, $157,000 a head. And I'm sorry, but some of those jobs are just routine maintenance. So if we could cover that, that would be good. And the last point is just, I know that Mick asked about had there been a change in policy regarding if someone is the subject of a criminal allegation or investigation or whatever, would they be automatically suspended? And I wasn't clear on what the answer is. That are they automatically suspended?
No.
So what is the threshold in that regard?
They're subject to the process which is set out in existing and Garda Síochána policy. No policies have been rewritten.
Right. And if they were the subject of a GSOC criminal investigation, would that be automatic?
No, there's no such thing as an automatic suspension. All cases are assessed on their own merits, and they're subject to already a pre-existing and Garda Síochána policy in respect of the consideration of suspension. Because
there was a worrying report on RTE during the week about two officers who were being criminally investigated by GSOC for serious racist comments that they made at an official Garda briefing. I'm wondering, in that context and in the context, are you aware that those officers have also been alleged to have made very serious homophobic remarks, including against the Taoiseach, and whether they're being investigated and whether those people who are under the subject of a criminal investigation have been suspended?
Well, I don't like going down into these individual cases. What I would state is that GSOC inform us of their investigations, rather whether it's a discipline investigation or whether it's a crime investigation, and they provide the information, and then we follow through a process then in all cases to consider then what our response should be, and a consideration of their duty status follows on. But each case is taken on an individual basis and subject then to individual analysis. There's no such thing as an automatic suspension.
So can I take it that those people have not been suspended?
I have yet to see the papers in that matter. So as I'd be the suspending authority, then I have to wait to see those papers.
Okay. All right.
Could I
Deputy
suggest you might need to review your policy?
All right. Deputy O'Leary, followed by Deputy Wallace, and that wraps us. Please.
2 points just I want to supplementaries really on previous questions. Firstly, I had asked in relation to, and you answered at length, in relation to meeting the Justice for the Forgotten, but I also asked in relation to Stephen Travers and whether you've met him. And I have another question as well.
No, sorry, I misunderstood. I misheard you. I'd met with Anne Travers. No, I haven't met with Mr. Stephen Travers.
Okay. Has there been a request, do you know?
I don't think there has. I think everybody who's asked to see me, I've met them from whatever area, you know, and obviously there's a lot of individuals who would like to see me about various matters, be it troubles or road traffic collisions, etc. So, you know, and I've acceded to all of those.
And the final one. Yeah, you responded in relation to the question on the North Street report, and I suppose not in the public domain as yet, but you said that you would be more assertive, the Gardaí would be more assertive in dealing with these situations in order to prevent the public order issue. I suppose it begs the question, do you mean to be more assertive with those who are in occupation of the property, or more assertive to those who are acting on behalf of the banks, or who have on behalf of those security personnel who I think it's fair to say are operating in a legally very grey and uncertain areas? So who do you intend on being more assertive with?
Well, as paraphrasing what I mean is that we're there and our responsibility is to preserve the peace and prevent crime. So we'll be assertive in making sure that the manner in which a repossession is conducted is one in which is conducive to ensuring that the peace is preserved and that crimes do not happen.
Okay. All right, Deputy O'Leary. Deputy Wallace, the last word.
Commissioner, just in relation to the suspension that I referred to on the 3rd of January, first question, did you inform the Minister for Justice in advance of the suspension? And secondly, you talked about defending the rule of law, and I'm just wondering, were you concerned about the fact that the media had the story about the suspension before you actually, the suspension took place? And I know you don't like talking about individual cases, but I mean, I would assume not many people would have known what you were going to do. And is it something that you've looked into?
Well, yes, I am concerned, and that is the subject of a separate investigation to understand, or to find out actually who may have leaked that information there, because that's entirely unacceptable. That's confidential information. It's not tolerable that such information is leaked from my organisation. No.
Yeah, obviously we'd be very conscious that traditionally so-called crime correspondents seem to have good access to confidential information over the years, and we'd be hoping that it's something that you could sort, and good luck with it.
Thank you, Deputy Wallace. Deputy Kenny, only because you're from Sligo Leitrim.
Thank you very much. Just very briefly, the report, the interim report and the full report, which is taking place at the moment, is about the people who were not diverted to the juvenile diversion programme. Is there any intention to do any assessment of the issues that I have raised in regard to those who went into the programme and have issues? And I would implore that would be a direction that we should move into.
The 103,000. Well, the scheme itself is subject to monitoring constantly. It's a statutory responsibility that we have, and is subject then to a yearly report. The authority have raised issues, the Policing Authority have raised issues about that report, and we will respond accordingly. So part of that will be, so take the 103,000, what's the feedback from that, what is the success of that? So there's already a forum, and I think we should use that forum then to promote confidence in the scheme and the authority are very clear on that as well.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Kelly.
It's just a one-line question, really. The Chair and I actually sit on a committee in Brussels, which is the political oversight of Europol. And maybe at some stage in the future, you may, maybe, I suppose, inform us and enlighten us in terms of, what your views, because you've great experience, really, having served at the PSNI and now in Garda Síochána in terms of Europol, and what Garda Síochána would like to see in terms of advancement of Europol, and because we would certainly take a read from your good selves in terms of what we should be pushing as part of that committee. So perhaps maybe prior to the Chair and I going to the next session in March, if some of your officers, or at least one of your officers who is directly connected with Europol, would like to brief us, we would welcome that.
We can absolutely facilitate that, and we're very keen on Europol, and in fact, actually, overall as an organisation, we want to be far more on the foot front internationally. I think there's more we can do in terms of the EU projects around the security of citizens of Europe, and also then how we assist with the various UN missions as well. We want to get in the front foot, and I didn't realise that you'd this influence with Europol. That's good to know.
Yeah, very good.
We sit on the Oversight Committee. Who else would you send?
Thank you very much.
We're all really scared.
We're going to give us a one-way ticket the next time.
This is the finest line of the day. On behalf of the committee, I again thank you, Commissioner Harris, Deputy Commissioner Toomey, and Chief Superintendent Cleary, for your attendance here today, your cooperation with the committee, and your responses to each of our questions. So the joint committee is adjourned until 9:45 a.m. on next Wednesday, the 20th of February 2019. To those to whom it applies, be here at 9 o'clock for the Select Committee. Same day. Thank you, Gorman.